What if the words you speak aren't yours? What if every conversation you've ever had, every apology, every confession, every whisper, every scream, wasn't spontaneous at all, but part of a cosmic script written long before your lungs ever filled with air? You sit across from someone, laugh at their joke, say something back, and yet, maybe it was already planned. Not just what you'd say, but how you'd say it. The pauses, the stutters, the secrets you didn't mean to share. Maybe your voice is just an actor's echo, trapped in a role you never auditioned for. And maybe this script you're following isn't written in ink, but in neural circuits, algorithms, or destiny. If that's true, then what does it mean to mean anything at all? Let's follow the echoes, sentence by sentence, back to their origin, into the loop of scripted reality. They say the voice is yours, that it begins in your throat, shaped by your tongue, pushed out by your breath. But what if that's a lie? What if the voice, your voice, was never really yours to begin with? Before you spoke your first word, before you cried as a baby, before you even understood what sound was, something had already written the blueprint. Not just of language, but of how you would speak, when you would interrupt, what you would hide. The moment you said I love you, or I'm sorry, or why did you leave? Was that truly spontaneous, or did the voice know before you did? Neuroscientists would tell you speech is just the tip of a very old iceberg. Words are generated in Broca's area, planned in Wernicke's, rehearsed across motor cortexes, meaning your brain decides before you know you've decided. There's a delay, a lag between the intention and the awareness of intention. You don't choose to speak in real time. You discover what you've already chosen. In fact, studies using EEG scans show that the brain lights up hundreds of milliseconds before you consciously decide to say something. This isn't just a hiccup of reaction time. It's a crack in the illusion of self-authorship. The moment you think, I'm about to speak, the process has already been set in motion, as if your brain was following a pre-laid path of electrical dominoes. You're not the conductor, you're the echo. Take Libet's famous experiments. He asked subjects to flick their wrists whenever they felt like it, and measured brain activity. Astonishingly, the brain began preparing for the action nearly half a second before the subject reported consciously deciding to move. The implication? Free will is late to its own show. Now imagine applying that same delay to speech. Every let's talk or don't leave me may have been decided long before your lips ever moved. So where is the voice before the voice? In biology? In memory? Or something stranger? Philosophers like Daniel Dennett argue that consciousness isn't a central narrator, it's a post-event editor, spinning stories to make sense of decisions already made by unconscious processes. You say, I spoke from the heart, but maybe your heart was reading from a teleprompter. Even in daily life, the way you speak follows patterns you didn't invent. Your tone is borrowed. Your vocabulary, inherited. The pauses in your sentences, they mimic the social rules of your upbringing, the region you were born in, the media you consume. When you find the right words, you're fishing in a pond someone else stocked. The deeper you go, the harder it is to say where your voice begins. Is it the result of evolution? Is it a software glitch in your wet hardware? Or is it part of a larger cosmic monologue? Some cultures believed speech was sacred, not because of what it said, but because of who it came from. The Greeks spoke of the Muses. The Vedic texts say speech arises from Vak, the goddess of utterance. In ancient Judaism, the Kabbalah speaks of a language so holy it shaped reality itself. Even in dreams, when you talk, who writes the lines? If you speak in a dream, yet you don't control the dream, who is feeding you your lines? Maybe the voice before you is the script behind reality, the algorithm that wrote the you that thinks it's unscripted. This leads us into a final discomfort. If your conversations are pre-written, who is the author? Is it nature? Culture? Language? Some god hiding behind syntax? Or is it you, a version of you from another plane, looping back to whisper into your neural machinery like a forgotten director giving line cues to the actor of your life? And if that's true, if your voice is just the playback of a script written in the dark, then maybe all you've ever done is recite yourself. You've probably felt it before, the words spilling out before you even know what you're saying. That uncanny sensation of listening to yourself talk, wondering, who's really in control here, as if your mouth knows the lines, and your mind is just a passive audience. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's neuroscience. Your brain is not a free-flowing river of thought, it's a predictive machine. Every sentence you speak is constructed not in the moment, but milliseconds in advance, based on probabilistic models wired into your neurons. And sometimes, those neurons seem to whisper the script before your self catches up. In fact, inside your skull sits something known as the default mode network, a complex web of brain regions that activates not when you're focused, but when your mind wanders, when you're idle, when you're imagining. It's here that narratives form, memories resurface, inner dialogue plays out, and it never turns off. Even when you're asleep, this network is rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet, rewriting dialogues from years ago, and drafting arguments you'll never say aloud. It's scripting. And what's terrifying is that these networks often do it without your permission. Experiments using fMRI scans show that the brain can predict your next spoken word before you consciously know what you're going to say. Using machine learning, researchers have been able to guess what word a person will speak just by analyzing neural signals moments earlier. This means the sentence was forming not in your awareness, but in the folds of grey matter deep beneath it. Your neurons were already lining up the syllables. You were just along for the ride. Now layer this with memory. Your brain doesn't store conversations like a tape recorder. It reconstructs them. Every time you recall a moment, your neurons slightly reshape it, alter it, overlay it with the present moment. So when you remember what someone said, or what you said, you're actually rewriting it, subtly editing the script. The past becomes the rehearsal for a future line you haven't yet spoken. This blurs everything. If your memory changes each time you speak it, and your future sentences are based on warped memories, then your whole life is one massive improv session, guided by a script you don't know you're following. But who's whispering that script? Evolution, maybe? Every creature that survives does so by anticipating its environment. Human speech is no different. Your brain evolved to anticipate reactions in others, to run simulations of how a sentence will land, what facial reaction it might trigger, how tone shifts outcomes. By the time you open your mouth to speak, 100 simulated versions of the sentence have already played out in the shadows of your cortex. Yet, if it's all simulation, are you ever really speaking, or are you just selecting from pre-modeled lines? This brings us to a darker corner of the mind, automatic speech. In rare neurological disorders like aphasia, or schizophasia, patients sometimes speak in fluent but meaningless sentences, a phenomenon known as word salad. These aren't deliberate, they're involuntary. Their brains still generate language, even when the self is offline. It's as if language doesn't need you, it just needs the machinery. Even more bizarre are cases of foreign accent syndrome, where people suffer a brain injury and wake up speaking their native language with an accent they've never learned. Again, the neurons shift, the circuits rewire, and suddenly, the script plays differently. No new consciousness decided this. It was pure neuroelectric rerouting. The actor changed tone midline without meaning to. So maybe the question isn't, are you writing your words? But rather, is your brain a stage for something deeper? Some philosophers, especially in panpsychism, argue that consciousness may not be the source of thought, but a byproduct of it. Your self is just a spotlight shone on processes that were already underway. The neuron fires, the word forms, the self watches, a little stunned. This flips the script. You're not the writer, you're the reader, and the script. It's written in spikes of voltage, in patterns of electrical storms you'll never fully decode. And here's the paradox. The more you believe you're in control, the less control you seem to have. That's what the neurons whisper. Where do your words come from? Not in the anatomical sense. We know the tongue moves, the lungs push air, the brain coordinates syllables, but beneath that, before biology, before intention, where does a sentence begin? The more you look for the origin of a conversation, the more it retreats like a shadow in fog. You ask, did I start this dialogue? But the answer comes back, echoed. And those echoes don't seem to have a source. Imagine you're in a cave, and you hear your own voice bounce back at you. But what if that echo spoke first? What if the thing you think you're expressing is just a reflection of something already uttered by a deeper layer of self, or something not you at all? Modern linguistics suggests that all speech is a form of repetition. You're not inventing language, you're participating in it. You borrow words that were shaped centuries ago, adopt phrases learned in childhood, mimic tone and rhythm from the people around you. Even when you think you're being original, writing a poem, confessing love, screaming into the night, you're still stitching together fragments of voices that were never yours to begin with. In this way, every sentence you speak is an echo, and that echo has no original voice, no first sound, just layers and layers of imitation. Take a simple phrase like, "I understand." Did you invent that sentence? Or did your brain retrieve it from a massive archive of social code, linguistic templates, emotional context, and cognitive shortcuts? There's no moment where you sat down and wrote it into existence. It emerged, as if it had always been waiting. In philosophy, this is the problem of infinite regress. If every word is based on another, and every sentence learned from somewhere else, then we never find the first cause, the primal voice. We just get echoes bouncing off one another in a chamber that never ends. And the more you try to locate that origin, the more your brain betrays you, because it's not built to create language from scratch. It's built to approximate. That's how predictive processing works. It fills in gaps, matches patterns, suggests next words before you think them. You're the aftershock, not the earthquake. Even when you're silent, the echoes are still there. Inner dialogue, thoughts phrased as if spoken aloud. We narrate our own lives in third-person or second-person voices, somewhere between therapist and ghost. But who started that monologue? At what age did you begin talking to yourself? And was it really you who began? Studies in developmental psychology show that children learn self-talk not by inventing it, but by internalizing the voices of authority, parents, teachers, media characters. What begins as "use your spoon, sweetheart," from a caregiver becomes "use your spoon" in the child's head. The speaker changes, but the sentence doesn't. The voice echoes inside, long after the original speaker is gone. In some cases, these echoes become intrusive. People with conditions like OCD or schizophrenia report hearing thoughts that don't feel like theirs, not auditory hallucinations, just alien thoughts. Sentences that emerge with no sense of authorship, words that appear without context, as if the script were written elsewhere and just projected into the mind like a dubbed film. This isn't just clinical, it's human. How many times have you thought something, and immediately wondered, where did that come from? An ugly thought, a random sentence, a poetic line, a dark confession, and yet it appeared, uninvited. Maybe there's no invitation needed. Maybe the mind is always tuned to a station that broadcasts these echoes, and we only notice them when the volume spikes. The mystics took this idea further. In Sufi poetry, Rumi describes the human voice as a reed flute, playing music blown from the breath of the divine. In Taoism, Laozi warns that the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. In other words, the moment something is said, it has already lost its origin. You can feel it too in those surreal conversations, where you say something you didn't plan, and the other person responds in perfect rhythm, and you both pause like who just choreographed that. Those moments hint at something scripted, something looping through both of you. The paradox is this: if there is no origin to your voice, then there may also be no clear ownership. You speak, others respond. You remember, they forget, but no one really knows where the line began. So every conversation becomes a question echoing across time, across minds, across selves. Who spoke first? Before you open your mouth, language already knows what you're going to say. Not metaphorically, literally. Your next word, your next sentence, your emotional tone, even your pauses, all forecastable. You may think you're shaping the words, choosing them, crafting your expression like a sculptor chiseling from thought, but in reality, you are being predicted, not just by technology, but by language itself. Start with what's already happening. Language models, like the one you're reading now, can generate eerily accurate sentences that sound human, not because they understand meaning, but because they've mapped the structure of how you speak, trained on billions of conversations. They don't just finish your sentence, they anticipate your soul, and here's the dark twist. They work because your speech patterns are far more predictable than you think. The average person uses a remarkably small portion of available vocabulary. We default to rhythm, habit, social mimicry. Our conversations become looping scripts of phrases like, "I don't know, that's crazy, you know what I mean." Linguistic filler that maps our predictability like breadcrumbs in the woods. These patterns are so consistent, your texting style alone can reveal your age, gender, political bias, relationship status, even your mental health condition. But this isn't just tech wizardry. It's a mirror. Predictive models don't make you predictable. They reveal that you already were. And this realization leads to an eerie possibility. What if language itself is a predictive machine? Not a tool you use, but a system that uses you. In linguistic determinism, The theory goes that language shapes not just how you speak, but how you think, that the limits of your vocabulary are the limits of your perception. If you have no word for a concept, you may not even notice it. The classic example is from the Hopi people, whose language allegedly doesn't treat time in the same linear way English does. Their world is not past, present, and future. It's unfolding in a continuum. Their reality is shaped by their syntax. So what does English predict about you? That you must identify yourself in the first person singular. That you must link yourself to time. I was, I am, I will be. That you must assign ownership to your emotions. I feel sad, but these structures aren't neutral. They train your brain to see the world as separate parts, to isolate the self, to assign blame, to script everything into a timeline with a narrator. Now imagine language not as a reflection of your mind, but as the script your mind follows. Every sentence has rules. Subject, verb, object, tense, mood, modality. Before you ever decide what you want to say, your brain is already building scaffolding. By the time you choose your words, your sentence structure has already narrowed the possibilities down to a few dozen options. Language pre-sorts your thoughts, channels them through approved pathways, and leaves you with the illusion of originality. It's like a maze. You feel free to move, but only where the walls allow. Think about moments of intense emotion. When you're heartbroken, what do you say? I miss you. I wish things were different. I don't know what happened. These aren't just personal, they're predictable. People around the world say these things, word for word, in 1,000 languages. It's not because they're cliches. It's because language arrives before emotion finishes forming. You reach for the phrases, because they've been waiting for you. Even our internal dialogue is built this way. Neuroscientists studying inner speech find that our minds talk to us using the same grammatical rules as spoken language. When you think to yourself, what should I do? That's not free thought. That's pre-scripted structure, guiding your self-questioning. And here comes the paradox. The more fluent you are in a language, the more tightly its patterns bind you. In a strange experiment, researchers asked bilingual participants to solve ethical dilemmas, once in their native tongue and once in a second language. Results? People made more rational, less emotional decisions when thinking in a non-native language. Why? Because the native language triggered deeply conditioned responses, cultural scripts and emotional cues baked into syntax. The second language provided distance, less prediction, less pull from the script. So language doesn't just predict your next word, it predicts your morality. It shapes your reactions. It whispers who you're supposed to be. And now, technology takes this further. Your phone can auto-complete your messages. Your voice assistant finishes your commands. Your social feeds anticipate your thoughts before you type them. It's not that these systems are getting smarter. It's that you've always been predictable. Now you're just being shown the blueprint. So next time you're about to speak, pause. Ask yourself, am I choosing this sentence? Or was it chosen for me long ago by the code of the language I live in? You thought you were the one who formed the sentence, that it bloomed in your mind like a spontaneous flower, unpredictable and new. But what if that sentence had been waiting for you all along? Waiting in silence, waiting in structure, waiting in fate. Every word you've ever said existed long before you spoke it. The entire vocabulary was there, sitting quietly in books, on lips, in dictionaries, in scripts written by hands now dust. You didn't create it. You reached into it. The sentence you spoke to your friend, the confession you whispered in the dark, the insult that slipped out too fast, all of them were part of a linguistic landscape you didn't build. You only walked its trails. But what if the sentence wasn't just possible? What if it was inevitable? In psycholinguistics, there's a phenomenon called priming. If someone hears the word doctor, they're more likely to say nurse than banana. If you say bread, someone else might unconsciously think of butter. Our thoughts are like dominoes arranged by the language itself, toppling into familiar formations with astonishing speed. And that's not you being clever. It's your brain being pulled toward predictable pathways by associations built over a lifetime. So that romantic line you thought of on the spot, that poetic phrase that sounded like genius, maybe it was just the sentence that fit the mold, the one that was already queued up behind a million invisible linguistic triggers. This becomes especially unsettling when we think about those uncanny moments. Ever said something you swore you've never said before, but it feels familiar, like déjà vu wrapped in words? It's not your memory failing. It's the sentence revealing that it always existed, quietly rehearsing itself in the background of your mind until the right emotional moment arrived. Writers often describe this phenomenon, the line they didn't plan, but just knew had to go there, as if the story wrote itself, as if the sentence had been waiting, lodged in the walls of the subconscious, until it finally broke through. Philosopher Carl Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, a reservoir of archetypes, patterns, and symbols shared by all humans. He believed stories, words, even phrases, emerge from a deeper structure we all tap into, unknowingly. Maybe your sentence wasn't just waiting for you. Maybe it was waiting for anyone who felt what you felt, who stood in the moment you stood in. And if that's true, then language becomes less like a tool and more like a timeline. The moment you said, "I'm sorry," that wasn't invention. It was a return. You walked into a space that had already been prepared, like an actor stepping onto a stage already lit. The set was built, the line was blocked. All you had to do was speak. Even in silence, sentences are waiting. You hold them in your throat during awkward pauses. You think them during arguments you'll never have. You leave them unsent in your text drafts. These aren't random. These are rehearsals, potential scripts spinning in the background, waiting for the right moment, the right partner, the right emotional cue to become real. Neuroscientists have found that when people prepare to speak, their brain activates regions associated with multiple possible sentences, not just one. You aren't choosing freely from infinite language. You're selecting from a narrow list of preloaded scripts, most of which you never even realize are there. The sentence you said when you broke up with someone, the words you spoke at a funeral, they felt honest, raw. But maybe they were simply the next logical move in a script your brain had drafted days, weeks, even years earlier. Maybe it was never really up to you. In religion, this idea appears in another form, predestination, the belief that every act, especially every word, is known, planned, and guided by something larger, whether it's divine will, karma, or fate. The core idea is the same. Your voice doesn't surprise the universe, it fulfills it. Even AI systems now mirror this haunting concept. Large language models don't think, they complete. They don't know what they're about to say until they've calculated the highest probability. But that's exactly what your brain does too. Your thoughts, your sentences, your next words, they're all just completions of patterns too deep to see. And so you begin to wonder, when you finally told someone, "I forgive you," when you screamed, "Leave me alone," when you whispered, "Done set, forget me," were those words chosen? Or were they waiting? Were they the product of a conscious self? Or were you simply the one who opened the door? Because if the sentence waited for you, then maybe you didn't speak it. Maybe it spoke you. What if no one's actually speaking? What if every conversation you've ever had was just language talking to itself, using you and everyone else as vessels? Words flowing through mouths like wind through pipes. Mouths open, sounds emerge, but the origin, nowhere to be found, no speaker, just transmission. This isn't just poetic musing. There are real-world cases, documented, clinical, philosophical, where speech happens without a speaker. In automatic writing, individuals report channeling conversations or messages they don't consciously create. The pen moves, the words flow, but the person holding the pen insists, "This isn't me." Likewise, in trance states and spiritual possession rituals, voices emerge from ordinary people in languages they claim not to know. Sentences arrive fully formed, conversations unfold, and yet the speaker feels like a bystander. So what defines a speaker? Ownership? Intention? Meaning? In linguistics, we often assume communication requires a source and a destination, a sender, a receiver. But what if the form of conversation can exist without either? Language doesn't need your identity to function. It needs your body, your attention, your social training, but not you. If words can emerge without authorship, then maybe your daily chats, small talk, confessions, debates are more like weather systems. You don't cause the rain, you just get caught in it. Consider how easily conversations happen without conscious planning. You say, "Hi," the other person replies, "Hey, how are you?" You answer reflexively. The exchange follows a script etched into culture, not creativity. No one really thinks. The conversation unfolds on autopilot, polite, predictable, and eerily speakerless. Even more bizarre conversations between strangers that mirror each other across the world. The same jokes, the same pickup lines, the same breakup speeches, almost like scripted dialogue passed through countless actors. So what if conversations aren't unique experiences, but instances of pre-written loops that activate when triggered? Your brain, after all, isn't writing new software every time you talk. It's running subroutines, chunks of verbal code triggered by context. Think of how many times you've said, "No worries, it's fine," or "It is what it is." These phrases live in your neural pathways like macros. They're not thought through, they're activated. In group dynamics, this becomes even clearer. Entire conversations unfold with multiple people talking, interrupting, finishing each other's sentences, yet no one seems to be in charge. It's like language is bouncing from body to body, using proximity as its conductor. Ideas mutate mid-sentence. Responses emerge before the question's even complete. Laughter begins before the joke lands. Who exactly is driving? In these moments, the speaker is irrelevant. The script is what matters. Philosopher Michel Foucault once argued that the author is a modern invention, something we use to assign ownership and meaning to texts, but not necessarily something that exists. He claimed that ideas, especially in language, often emerge from systems larger than any individual. A culture, a discourse, a machine. You may think you're expressing yourself, but you're actually a participant in a much older, speakerless dialogue. Even dreams play this trick. In dreams, you often speak, and others speak back. But you created both voices. You control the entire narrative, yet it surprises you. That contradiction reveals something deeply unsettling, that the appearance of conversation is enough to simulate meaning, even if no one is really speaking. Now consider AI-generated chat. You talk to a chatbot, it replies, you respond, it asks another question, a full conversation unfolds, but there's no one on the other side, no soul, no intention, no speaker, just probabilities, just predictions, and yet, you feel heard. So what if your real-life conversations are the same? Scripts playing themselves out, emotional reflexes, social cues. You say what you're meant to say. They respond how they've been conditioned to. Words fly back and forth like tennis balls. But no one's truly serving. The game plays itself. This leads to a more haunting idea. If no one is speaking, maybe no one is listening either. Just mirrors reflecting mirrors. Speech bouncing between minds like a ping-pong of pre-programmed phrases. Every argument, every love confession, every whispered secret, just language doing what language does. There's a Buddhist koan that asks, "Who is it that hears this sound?" You try to answer, and the words dissolve, not because you lack language, but because the question exposes the illusion that there is someone there speaking, someone there hearing. Maybe that illusion is necessary. Maybe the feeling of authorship is what allows the script to function. But deep down, maybe you've always known that every conversation you've ever had was a story already written by no one. You open your mouth to speak, believing it's your will that moves the words. But what if your mouth is not the speaker? It's the puppet, a hollow instrument pulled by invisible strings, mouthing syllables written somewhere you'll never reach. The lips part, the tongue forms shapes. But the consciousness, merely the echo chamber. The ventriloquist's doll believes it's alive until it pauses long enough to feel the hand inside. Let's start with how the body behaves in speech. The muscles in your face, throat, jaw, and diaphragm execute intricate movements every time you speak. You don't consciously command these actions. You never say, "Now contract the thyroretentoid muscle," or "Let's raise the soft palate." Your body knows the choreography. And that choreography is triggered by patterns, most of them unconscious. The moment the idea forms, your body follows, like a puppet that's been here before. In fact, most of your speech production system functions automatically. The brain sends instructions to articulatory muscles faster than you can perceive. A cascade of neurochemical signals lights up motor pathways before you're even aware that you're about to speak. It's not that you say something and then your mouth moves. It's that your mouth begins moving before you know the sentence. You're watching a puppet perform and mistaking yourself for the puppeteer. In neuropsychology, this is especially clear when we study cases of echolalia, a condition in which individuals repeat phrases or words they've heard, often with no control or intention. It's not mimicry, it's automation. The mouth remembers, the brain retrieves, but the self feels absent. This highlights a deeper truth. The mouth can be trained to speak without the self, and once it learns the pattern, it doesn't ask for permission. Think of how often you say things you didn't mean to say. You blurt something out and think, Why did I say that? You apologize for how you sounded. You try to explain what you meant. But all these reactions point to a deeper fracture. The mouth spoke, and you, the mind, didn't agree. That's not autonomy. That's automation with commentary. Children experience this vividly as they learn to speak. At first, their speech is pure mimicry. They don't understand the words. They copy the rhythm, the tone, the cadence. But eventually the puppet gains enough memory to perform without the original master. And then we call it independent thought. But is it? Or is it just an upgraded puppet show? The phenomenon of slips of the tongue, also known as Freudian slips, reveals another layer. You try to say one thing, but something else escapes. A wrong name, an accidental truth, a hidden desire. These slips aren't random. They come from underneath, the unconscious rising through the script. The puppet mouth betraying the narrator behind the curtain. Then there's ventriloquism, not just as performance art, but as metaphor. The voice is dislocated. The sound emerges from one body, but the listener is tricked into thinking it comes from another. This illusion is a mirror of our daily speech. We feel the voice coming from us, but perhaps the true speaker lies elsewhere, deep in our conditioning, our language systems, or something stranger. Even trauma imprints itself on the puppet. People who have experienced severe emotional events often report losing their voice, not knowing what to say, or speaking in a voice that doesn't feel like their own. The puppet gets disconnected from the core. The mouth becomes an artifact of pain, repeating scripts meant to survive, not express. Actors understand this intimately. They train their mouths to become vessels, to embody characters, to deliver monologues with emotion they don't personally feel. But in doing so, they often report becoming the character, at least temporarily. The mouth leads. The identity follows, just as a puppet, once animated enough, begins to feel alive. And what about you? Think of every time you performed for politeness. Every time you said, "I'm fine," when you weren't. Every compliment you gave out of obligation. Every laugh that was rehearsed. Every phrase you said because silence felt heavier. In those moments, your mouth wasn't speaking from truth. It was following a script, a culturally sanctioned, emotionally defensive script. The puppet moved. Now the deeper question, if the mouth is a puppet, who pulls the strings? Your neural circuitry, your emotional history, your subconscious defense mechanisms, or something even further removed, like the ghost of culture, evolution, and fate tangled together. Some mystics believe that the body is merely the outermost layer of a soul, a temporary marionette operated by forces beyond comprehension. The voice you use is a tool borrowed by the deeper self, or the greater scriptwriter. But what if even that is a trick? What if there is no true self beneath? Just layers of puppet masters all pointing at each other. You speak. Others respond. You listen. You reply. But the puppets are dancing in loops. So the next time words leave your mouth, ask yourself, did I pull the string? Or did I twitch because something ancient, unseen, and inevitable told me to? You think you spoke in the moment, that the words came when they did, because you decided the time was right. But what if that timing wasn't yours? What if every pause, every interruption, every well-timed joke or devastating silence was part of a choreography you never authored? What if the moment you chose to speak was chosen for you? We tend to believe timing is a skill, in comedy, in love, in argument. But timing isn't just about delivery, it's about control, and the terrifying truth is, you don't control it. Not entirely, not even mostly. Your brain operates on delays, processing input, weighing context, constructing responses milliseconds before you become aware of them. In conversation, those delays are invisible, but they matter. Neuroscientific studies show that by the time you decide to speak, your brain has already been preparing for it. Just like with physical movement, your verbal responses are queued up in advance. You feel like you jump in at just the right moment. But that moment was primed by social cues, environmental rhythms, emotional undercurrents, and subconscious prediction models. Your timing isn't creative, it's reactive. Think about how conversations actually unfold. You rarely finish a sentence before the other person starts speaking. The gap between turns is often less than 200 milliseconds, faster than you can consciously formulate a response. This means your answer began forming before the question was even finished. You don't speak when it's your turn. You speak when the pattern says you must. Timing is dictated by the flow of the script, not the intention of the actor. We see this in everyday phrases. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, these aren't random. They're cues, turn signals in the traffic of dialogue. When you use them, you're signaling that it's your turn now. But you didn't invent those rules, you inherited them. And the moment you follow them, you're not timing your speech. You're syncing with a script. Consider laughter. People often laugh, not because something is funny, but because the timing requires it. Social scientists have shown that most laughter doesn't follow jokes. It follows statements. Normal ones. Observations. Because laughter isn't always about humor. It's about rhythm. A beat that the conversation has to hit. And when it does, your body reacts on cue. The laugh escapes. And you smile like you meant it. Even in arguments, timing governs everything. You don't just speak your mind, you wait for your opening. For the silence between their sentences. For the escalation or the retreat. And by the time you choose to speak, your body has already absorbed signals from tone, volume, facial expression, and context. Your brain runs calculations in the background. Now, speak now, and you do. But you didn't create that timing, you received it. Now go deeper. Trauma affects timing too. People who've experienced emotional or psychological wounds often speak out of sync. Too fast, too slow, too loud, too soft. Their timing betrays their pain. The nervous system misfires, unable to read the social script properly. They interrupt, they freeze, they choke. Not because they're impolite, but because the internal clock that syncs them to the world has been broken. This proves timing is neurological, not personal. A puppet string wired into the cortex. Even silence has timing. Ever sat in a room and felt the pressure of not speaking? The silence grew heavy, not because it was long, but because it broke the expected pattern. We anticipate certain beats in dialogue, and when someone refuses to speak on cue, we feel discomfort. Not because of what they didn't say, but because they disrupted the choreography. So then, was the silence ever your choice? Maybe you paused in that breakup, not because you needed time to think, but because silence was part of the script. Maybe you waited a day to reply to that message, not because you were being strategic, but because something inside you recognized the dramatic timing, not you, just the rhythm of language looping through you. Even culture wires us with different conversational timing. In Japan, pauses are considered respectful. In the US, they're awkward. In France, overlapping dialogue is seen as passion. In Scandinavia, it's seen as rudeness. So your idea of natural timing is actually a learned choreography. Your pauses aren't yours. Your rhythms aren't instinct. They're inherited. Now think of your most important conversations. The moment you said, "I love you." The second you decided to confess, the final word in a fight. Did you really choose when to say it? Or did the weight of the moment drag the words out of you on schedule? Because that's what makes this terrifying. The most meaningful sentences in your life may have been spoken on cue. A cue you didn't write. A rhythm you didn't set. A timing that waited for you to think you were in control, right before pulling the string. So maybe it's not your mouth, not your thought, not your choice. Maybe even the moment wasn't yours. You open your mouth, and the reply feels fresh, spontaneous, alive. But what if every answer you've ever given was already waiting for you, etched long ago, written into you by conversations that came before? What if every yes, every no, every I don't know, wasn't created in the present, but resurrected from the past? Language isn't born in the moment. It's inherited. The way you argue, the way you comfort, the way you joke, these are echoes of dialogues you didn't even realize you memorized. When you reassure a friend, you're repeating the tone your parent used when you were a child. When you flirt, you mimic fragments of lines you've heard in movies or songs. Even your insults carry the DNA of someone else's words, sharpened long before you were ever in that fight. You're not replying in the present. You're performing old lines. Psychologists call this script theory. The idea that people don't act from scratch. They follow learned patterns of behavior that are activated by familiar contexts. Think about how many times you fallen into scripted exchanges. "Hi, how are you?" "Good. And you?" These aren't real conversations. They're rehearsed lines from cultural memory, recycled endlessly, detached from meaning. You don't reply because you choose to. You reply because the situation activated an ancient loop. Even deeper, your personal history infiltrates every sentence. The way you respond in anger mirrors how anger was spoken to you. The way you confess love mirrors how love was modeled for you. Each conversation drags behind it a long shadow of conversations you thought were forgotten, but nothing is forgotten. Every word is archived in the body. Your voice is a library disguised as a mouth. Consider déjà vu in conversation. That uncanny moment where someone says something, and you feel like you've heard it before. But maybe it isn't déjà vu. Maybe it's recognition. A replay. Their sentence pulls up the old one hidden in memory, and your reply follows the grooves carved years ago. You don't invent the line. You walk the path already cleared. Memory itself plays tricks here. Neuroscience tells us that memories aren't fixed. They're reconstructed every time you recall them. That means every remembered conversation is slightly rewritten, which means when you base your present reply on the past, you're replying not to what happened, but to the edited script your brain created afterward. Your present self is stuck conversing with an unreliable past self, while believing it's responding in real time. It gets stranger. Sometimes you reply to someone who isn't even there. You rehearse comebacks in the shower. You argue with an absent friend in your head. You replay a breakup and say the thing you wish you had said. These ghost conversations prove how scripted replies are. They don't need the present to exist. They wait in storage, ready for the chance to break free. Even silence carries replies from the past. When you hold back an answer, when you bite your tongue, you're often suppressing a line you've already rehearsed in older wounds. Trauma lives in these withheld words. People carry unsaid replies for years, sometimes lifetimes, whole speeches that remain locked in their throats, whispered only to themselves. And yet those words still shape the conversations they never reach. A withheld reply is still a reply. It haunts the present. Culture multiplies this effect. Collective scripts are passed down like heirlooms. Political slogans, religious phrases, poetic cliches, they become the scaffolding of conversation, thoughts and prayers. Better late than never. Everything happens for a reason. When you use them, you're not speaking as yourself. You're channeling generations of past voices. You've borrowed their lines. You're quoting the dead without knowing it. Even in therapy, when people find their voice, what often happens is recognition. They realize they've been replaying conversations from childhood, repeating lines that no longer serve them. Therapy becomes the act of rewriting replies. But even then, the old lines remain, etched deep, waiting to be triggered again. Now think about the replies that shaped your life. The first "I love you" you received. The first "goodbye." The teacher who said, "You'll never make it." The friend who whispered, "I'll always be here." Those sentences didn't vanish. They became the soil from which your own replies grew. Every new word you speak carries their ghost. You're not just talking to the person in front of you, you're talking to everyone you've ever spoken to. So when you argue with your partner, maybe you're really replying to your father. When you reassure your child, maybe you're echoing your grandmother. When you confess something late at night, maybe you're repeating the confession you never got to make years ago. You think it's present, but it's the past, dressing up in the costume of now. That's the unsettling paradox. You don't speak into conversations, you speak through them. Every reply is recycled. Every word is second-hand. The present is a stage where the past keeps performing its endless encore. So ask yourself this. The next time you answer someone, the next time you hear your voice leap into the air, are you really replying to them? Or are you replying to someone long gone? You think you remember your words, but what if it's the other way around? What if the words remember you? Every phrase you've ever spoken lingers in the air, embedded in the memories of others, etched into recordings, stored in the neural pathways of your own brain. Words never vanish. They archive you, they become your shadows. Consider how memory works. The brain doesn't store experiences like a video file. It stores patterns, associations, neural connections that reassemble the past when triggered. When you recall what you said 10 years ago, you're not replaying the exact sentence, you're reconstructing it from fragments, but the words are still there, imprinted, waiting. In that sense, they remember you more faithfully than you remember them. Think about the phrases you've said so often, they've become part of your identity. A catchphrase, a joke you recycle, a phrase you lean on when you're nervous, like "you know what I mean," or "at the end of the day." These aren't just filler, they're fossils of your speech habits, repeating across years, testifying to who you were and who you remain. The words remember, even when you've forgotten. But it's not just your memory that holds them. Other people carry your words inside them. The harsh thing you said in anger may live in someone for decades. The kind thing you whispered at the right moment may become the sentence they repeat when they comfort themselves. Your words extend beyond you, creating versions of yourself that exist in other people's heads. Sometimes those versions feel more real than the one in your own. This is why people say, "I can still hear their voice." After someone dies, their words linger. Their loved ones replay phrases, tones and patterns, sometimes hearing them as if spoken fresh. The words outlive the speaker. They become autonomous, carrying memory like DNA. When you're gone, it's not your body that remains. It's the phrases people recall, the way you said them, the rhythm of your speech. Even culture remembers you through words. Writers, poets, philosophers. They don't survive in flesh. They survive in language. Shakespeare is not bones in the ground. Shakespeare is his sentences, remembered, repeated, quoted in millions of voices centuries later. The words don't just preserve memory, they are memory. And the strangest part? Words sometimes remember things you never consciously intended. You say something, and years later, someone reminds you, "You once told me this." You're startled, you don't recall, but they do. The words lived on in them, carrying a version of you that you no longer access. It's almost like language creates clones of you, scattered in the minds of others, looping endlessly. Science gives this a sharper edge. Studies in psycholinguistics show that language processing leaves durable traces in the brain. Words you frequently use strengthen neural pathways, making them easier to retrieve in the future. The more you say them, the more they embed themselves. You think you're using the word, but really, the word is using you, reinforcing itself, making sure it will survive through your mouth again. There's also a darker side. Words can trap you. Labels, for instance. If as a child you were called lazy, those words remembered you long after you stopped believing them. They shaped your behavior, your self-image, your life decisions. The label doesn't forget. It holds you hostage. In therapy, people often discover that the most persistent part of their pain isn't the event. It's the sentence spoken around it. The words remembered when they wished they could have been erased. Even silence remembers. The things you didn't say, the confessions you withheld, they create negative space in memory. People recall the absence of words as vividly as their presence. You never said you loved me. You didn't defend me. Those unspoken lines remain etched in memory, like empty shelves in a library. And then there are the words you leave behind in permanent form. Text messages, social media posts, letters, voice recordings. These are memory crystallized. Even after you forget, they exist as artifacts, ready to resurrect you in the exact moment you typed or spoke them. Centuries from now, your digital trail might still whisper, "This was who you were." But here's the paradox. While words remember you, they also change you. You live differently because you know your words will outlast you. You hesitate before confessing. You choose phrasing carefully in arguments. You censor yourself online. Because deep down you know, words don't vanish. They archive, they follow, they echo. So perhaps the real question is, do you remember your words, or do they remember you better than you ever could? And if words are the only part of you that truly endures, then maybe you're not flesh, not thought, not soul. Maybe you are simply the sentences that survived. The words that will outlive you. The words that will keep repeating you. The words that we'll never forget. Every conversation seems to have a beginning. Someone speaks first, and someone replies. But if you trace it back far enough, the trail vanishes. Where did the dialogue begin? Where was the first word born? You discover that the conversation didn't start with you, or with them. It started nowhere. And maybe all dialogue emerges from that void. Think about your daily exchanges. How was your day? Not bad. What's up? Nothing much. These feel casual, unimportant, but notice something strange. The words don't really come from you. They arrive, they appear on your tongue, as if dropped there by an invisible hand. You don't stop to invent them. You don't pause to engineer them. They flow, as though the dialogue itself needed to exist, and you were simply the vessel it passed through. This isn't limited to small talk. Even profound conversations, the love confessions, the breakups, the goodbyes, don't always feel authored. How many times have you said something important, and afterward thought, where did that come from? It didn't feel like you, it felt borrowed, as if the line had been whispered to you by a script already unfolding. Philosophers have long toyed with this. Derrida argued that language has no stable origin, that every word depends on another word. Every sentence depends on another sentence. The dialogue is infinite regress. You can't pin down a first cause, because there isn't one. Every voice is an echo of something older, deeper, hidden. Dialogue is suspended in a chain of meanings that never resolves, like a song that never truly begins or ends. Even neuroscience supports this. When two people converse, their brains literally synchronize. Studies using fMRI scans show that speakers and listeners' brainwaves often lock into rhythm, firing in patterns that mirror each other. But this synchronization doesn't originate with one person. It emerges between them, in the space of interaction. Dialogue, then, isn't yours or theirs. It's a third entity, born out of nowhere, living briefly in the air before dissolving. Consider dreams. In dreams you speak, and dream figures reply. You don't consciously generate their lines, yet you hear them clearly. The dialogue feels real, surprising, alive, but it has no source. You and the dream both inhabit the same stage, reciting lines that seem to arise from emptiness. If you can have full conversations in sleep without a conscious speaker, doesn't that suggest all conversations might be like this, emerging from nowhere, only appearing to belong to someone? Even literature mirrors this truth. Writers often describe the eerie sensation of their characters speaking to them. The writer types, but it feels like the dialogue is dictating itself. They didn't plan it, it arrived, and it often arrives better, sharper, more alive than what they could consciously craft. Where did it come from? From nowhere, from the hidden machinery of language itself. This nowhere is not emptiness. It's potential, a field of infinite sentences waiting to be spoken, infinite dialogues waiting to unfold. You don't own them, you tune into them. And when the frequency is right, the words pour through you. The dialogue becomes inevitable. But this raises a disturbing question. If dialogue comes from nowhere, then what are you in that process? Are you the speaker, or are you just the receiver of a message that needed to exist regardless of you? If every exchange is born in a place outside of self, then maybe conversations are less about expressing who you are, and more about revealing that you are replaceable. Someone else could have spoken those lines, and the dialogue would have gone on just the same. Think about the times you've stumbled into a stranger's conversation and predicted what they were going to say, or when you've watched a movie scene unfold and anticipated the exact line before the actor spoke it. How did you know? Because the dialogue wasn't authored in the moment. It was flowing from that same nowhere, the place where language waits, repeating itself across people, across cultures, across time. And maybe that's why so many conversations feel repetitive. Why arguments loop, why apologies recycle, why breakups echo the same lines millions of people have spoken before. It's not you, it's me. I need space. I'll never forget you. These aren't personal. They're fragments of an endless dialogue replaying itself in countless mouths. A nowhere script, traveling across generations, using each new speaker as its temporary stage. So if your conversations come from nowhere, do you truly own them? Or are you simply borrowing lines from a script that has no beginning and no end? That's the paradox. Dialogue feels personal, but it belongs to no one. It appears out of nowhere, dances briefly in your voice, and disappears again, waiting for the next actor to step on stage. And in that sense, maybe you never really had a conversation at all. Maybe conversations had you. You imagine your thoughts come first, and your words follow. You think, I should say this, and then your mouth obeys. But what if that's an illusion? What if the thought has already been said, long before you notice it? What if your words aren't the expression of a thought, but the evidence that the thought was never yours to begin with? Neuroscientists studying decision-making discovered something unsettling. The brain often begins preparing an action before the person becomes aware of wanting to act. This applies to speech, too. EEG scans show that neural activity predicting a spoken word appears milliseconds before you consciously decide to say it. The thought didn't create the word revealed that the thought had already been said somewhere in the silence of your brain. Imagine this in conversation. You sit across from someone. They ask you a question. Before you even decide how to reply, your brain is already constructing a sentence. By the time you believe you've chosen your words, the choice has already happened. You're watching a play unfold and mistaking yourself for the playwright. This isn't just lab science, it's daily life. Think of those times you blurt something out and immediately regret it. I didn't mean to say that, but you did. The thought wasn't waiting politely for your approval. It slipped out because it had already been set in motion. You only became aware of it too late, like a witness catching a thief after the crime was done. Even your inner monologue isn't truly yours. When you think in language, You're rehearsing words that already exist, phrases you've heard, borrowed, repeated. You're not creating thoughts. You're pulling them from a vast library of pre-written lines. When you tell yourself, "I can't do this," or "everything will be okay," you're not inventing comfort or despair. You're quoting scripts that countless others have spoken before you, thoughts that were already said. Writers often describe this eerie sensation. A line of dialogue appears in their mind, fully formed, as if whispered. They don't invent it, they discover it. Musicians speak of lyrics coming out of nowhere. Mystics speak of hearing voices not their own. Across all these experiences lies a strange common thread. The thought is already said before it is thought. Consider language itself. It's older than you. Every word in your vocabulary existed before you were born. So how could your thoughts, built from those words, ever be purely yours? If your thoughts are constructed from ancient materials, then aren't you just rearranging lines from a play that has been going on for centuries? The thought may feel new to you, but it has been said before, by other mouths, in other forms. This creates a paradox about originality. When you say something profound, was it truly your insight? Or was it a phrase lurking in the cultural unconscious, waiting for someone to repeat it? This is why so many quotes overlap across thinkers, why truths reappear in different civilizations. The thought doesn't belong to anyone, it belongs to thought itself, and it speaks through whoever happens to be listening. Even memory betrays you here. When you recall past conversations, you don't just remember, you reconstruct, you edit, you paraphrase. Sometimes you even insert phrases that were never spoken, and yet you believe they were. This proves that your mind is perfectly capable of convincing you that you thought something when in fact it had already been written, smuggled in from memory, culture, or unconscious repetition. This becomes especially haunting in relationships. How often do people accuse each other of repeating the same arguments? We've had this fight 100 times. They're right. The thought has already been said. The anger, the defense, the apology, they're not fresh, they're reruns. The words roll out with grim familiarity, because the script has been rehearsed, line by line, for years. In mystical traditions, there's a saying, every prayer is older than the one who speaks it. The same could be said for thoughts. Every thought is older than the thinker. You don't own them, they own you. You are simply the latest mouth to give them sound. So here's the paradox, you can't escape. If every thought has already been said, then your mind is not a birthplace, it's a stage. And you are not the author of your script. You are the echo that believes it's the first voice. So the next time you think, I should say this, pause. Ask yourself, did I think that? Or was it already spoken, long before I believed it was mine? Because maybe you've never had an original thought. Maybe you've only been overhearing echoes of the thought already said. Every conversation depends on two roles, the speaker and the listener. You believe you're listening when someone talks to you. You nod, you focus, you interpret. But what if listening itself is an illusion? What if you're not really hearing what they say, but only hearing what your mind allows? What if you've never truly listened at all? Cognitive science shows that hearing isn't passive. When someone speaks, your brain doesn't wait politely for the words to finish. It predicts them. Long before the sentence ends, you've already guessed the outcome. This is why you can fill in words when the sound cuts out on a bad phone call, or why you sometimes interrupt before someone finishes. Your brain is completing the script. But here's the catch. Prediction isn't listening, it's replacing. You're not hearing them. You're hearing yourself, projected onto their words. This explains why two people can listen to the exact same speech and walk away with totally different interpretations. The words don't land the same way, because no one ever hears raw language. We hear filtered language, processed through memories, biases, expectations. The listener believes they're receiving a message, but they're mostly decoding themselves. Even more eerie, sometimes you don't hear what was actually said at all. Psychologists call this the misattribution effect. People often remember being told something that was never spoken, because their brain filled the gap with what it expected to hear. The listener's illusion tricks you into believing that the dialogue was clear, when in fact the script was half invented in your head. Think about arguments. Have you ever accused someone of saying something cruel, only for them to insist they never said it? Both sides believe they're right. Both sides remember the words, but maybe no one is lying. Maybe both are prisoners of the listener's illusion, trapped in conversations written partly by memory, partly by imagination. And consider silence. You think listening happens only when words are spoken, But silence is also scripted. When someone pauses, you lean in, waiting for the next line. Your brain rushes to fill the gap with meaning. They're angry, they're thinking, they're judging me. But none of this was said. You're not listening to silence. You're projecting dialogue into it. Once again, the illusion of listening takes over. Technology reveals this too. Miscommunication over text is rampant. Without tone or facial cues, people misread intentions constantly. A short K can be read as cold, dismissive or neutral, depending on the reader's expectations. The writer didn't intend those meanings, but the listener's illusion supplied them anyway. Every emoji, every punctuation mark becomes a placeholder for imagined tone. The text doesn't speak clearly. The reader completes it. Even love depends on this illusion. Lovers say the same phrases. I miss you. I love you. I need you. But the listener never hears them in the same way twice. Context, mood, and memory reshape the meaning each time. You're not hearing the words. You're hearing the echoes of every past time they were said, layered over with your hopes and fears. Listening is never fresh. It's haunted. Mystics understood this centuries ago. In Zen Buddhism, teachers ask, who is it that hears? The question dissolves into paradox, because the act of listening is inseparable from the act of interpretation. The listener isn't a neutral receiver. It's the same machine as the speaker, looping language back into itself. In some sense, there is no listener at all, only echoes being mistaken for reception. This becomes clearest when you realize you don't even listen to yourself. Think of the last time you rewatched a video of you speaking, or listened to a recording of your own voice. Didn't it sound strange? Alien? Wrong? That's because the words you thought you said don't sound the same outside your head. Even you mishear you. Even you are trapped in the illusion of listening. So what if no one has ever really listened to you? What if every word you've spoken has been filtered, twisted, misunderstood, or half invented by the people who heard it? What if the idea of communication is less about clarity and more about a shared hallucination, where both sides agree to pretend that meaning was successfully transferred? That's the illusion of listening. A dance where you believe you're receiving truth, but you're only receiving reflections. A dialogue where the listener never really hears the speaker, because the speaker too never really spoke. And so, perhaps no conversation has ever been heard, only imagined, only guessed, only filled in. The listener's illusion is not the failure of language, it is the essence of it. We think silence is the absence of language, that when no one is speaking, nothing is being said, but silence is rarely empty. Beneath it lies a script that shapes the moment, directs the tension, and says more than words ever could. Silence is not the absence of conversation, silence is the conversation. Think of the silences you've lived through. The long pause after someone asked you a question you didn't want to answer. The stillness after you confessed something heavy. The gap between a breakup sentence and the reply that didn't come. Those moments feel unbearable, not because nothing was happening, but because too much was happening. Silence speaks, and you can hear it loud. Psychologists have shown that in conversations, silence isn't random. It follows predictable rhythms. In Western culture, a pause longer than 4 seconds often feels uncomfortable. In Japanese culture, silence can stretch longer without tension. In Scandinavian societies, pauses signal reflection and sincerity. In Mediterranean ones, they're read as hesitation or awkwardness. This means even silence is coded. It has rules. It has expectations. It has a script, one you didn't write, but follow unconsciously. Silence also carries memory. Think of an argument where someone refused to reply. Years later, you still recall that silence more vividly than the words. It wasn't emptiness. It was a line delivered without sound, a refusal that echoed louder than speech. Silence in this way becomes the most violent sentence in dialogue, because it forces the listener to fill the void with their own fears, their own meanings. In therapy, silence is sometimes used deliberately. The therapist pauses, lets the client sit in stillness. The silence pulls words from them. They fill it, not because the therapist asked, but because silence itself demands response. The script beneath silence says, speak, and people obey. Even nature plays this trick. After loud thunderstorms, after explosions, after chaos, silence feels thick, almost scripted, as if the world itself delivered a line break. Musicians exploit this too. The pause between notes is as essential as the notes themselves. In fact, Silence is what gives words rhythm. Without it, speech would collapse into noise. But the haunting part is this: silence often carries hidden sentences. When someone doesn't respond to your message, you don't read it as nothing. You read it as they don't care, or they're angry, or they're gone. Silence forces you to project the script onto it. In this way, silence is rarely neutral. It manipulates. It controls the meaning. It makes you speak lines you didn't know were inside you. Even religion treats silence as sacred. In the mystic traditions of Sufism, silence is said to contain divine truths too profound for words. In Zen Buddhism, silence is the highest teaching. In Christian mysticism, silence is the language of God. These traditions suggest that beneath silence, something vast speaks. The script continues, but at a frequency beyond the ear. Science, too, supports the power of absence. Studies in communication show that pauses in conversations increase emotional intensity. A 5-second silence before answering a difficult question creates more impact than any immediate response. It's as if silence loads the moment with energy, waiting for the words to detonate. But here's the paradox. If silence always carries meaning, then silence isn't freedom from the script. It is the script. Every pause you take, every word you don't say, every moment you hold your breath in conversation, it was all part of the choreography. You believe you chose not to speak, but maybe the silence was chosen for you. Maybe the unsaid line was as inevitable as the spoken one. Consider the silences that haunt you most. The one before someone walked out the door, the one before the doctor gave the diagnosis, the one before you decided to stay quiet instead of telling the truth. Were those silences really yours, or were they scripted into the rhythm of your life, waiting for you to perform them? Because silence isn't empty. Silence is a stage direction. It's the line beneath the line, the voice beneath the voice, and you never escape it. Even when you choose to say nothing, the silence speaks for you. And so you begin to realize, there are no gaps in conversation, no true blanks, no empty spaces. There are only sentences we can hear, and sentences we can't. The script runs beneath both, which means you have never truly been silent. You've only ever delivered the line called silence. You imagine you're the one dreaming up your sentences, that words are born in your mind, shaped by thought, carried by intention. But what if sentences dream themselves into existence, and you're just the body they pass through? What if the language is alive, not in your head, but in its own endless loop of self-creation? Dreams give us a clue. In dreams you speak and others reply, whole dialogues unfold, jokes are told, arguments rage, speeches flow, and yet you aren't consciously writing these exchanges. They rise on their own, with coherence you didn't invent. Even more strange, dream sentences often surprise you. You wake up thinking, I didn't know I knew those words. The sentence dreamed itself. You were only its stage. Writers describe the same thing. A line arrives, fully formed, and feels alien. It wrote itself, they say. Musicians speak of lyrics or melodies coming to them, rather than being composed. These testimonies reveal something haunting. Sentences sometimes bypass the thinker. They emerge with their own momentum, as if the dream of the sentence had been running all along, and the human was simply its vessel. Language, after all, is self-perpetuating. Sentences don't exist in isolation. They generate more sentences. One phrase sparks another, like neurons firing in a chain. You don't choose each word separately. The rhythm of syntax, the pull of grammar, the tug of cultural patterns, they carry you forward, sentence after sentence. Once you begin speaking, it's difficult to stop. Not because you want to keep going, but because the sentence itself pulls you into its continuation. It dreams the next line before you're aware of it. Even science hints at this eerie autonomy. Linguists studying emergent grammar argue that language evolves spontaneously, outside of any one person's control. Grammar rules appear, change, and spread without central design. Language dreams itself into complexity, using us as the medium. We don't create language, we are created by it. Think about how often you finish someone else's sentence. You don't know exactly what they'll say, but the structure guides you. The sentence dreamed itself into your prediction. Even before the words were spoken, the shape of the phrase was already alive. This is why clichés exist. They're sentences that dream themselves into completion. Better safe than sorry. When it rains it pours. These are not your choices, they're inevitabilities. Even your private thoughts behave this way. You begin with a phrase, and suddenly it carries you. You mutter to yourself, and before you realize it, you've spoken an entire paragraph you didn't mean to rehearse. The sentences dream themselves, looping in your head, sometimes obsessively. Inner dialogue becomes less like deliberate thought, more like language running its own software. And here's the haunting part. Sometimes sentences dream darker than you want. An intrusive thought appears, ugly, cruel, absurd. You didn't summon it. It slipped in, the sentence dreamed itself, and you became the unwilling host. This is why people feel unsettled by their own thoughts. Because deep down they realize, not all sentences are chosen. Many arrive uninvited, already rehearsed. Cultures have noticed this for centuries. In mystic traditions, words are sometimes treated as entities, living forces with will of their own. The Hebrew Kabbalah treats letters as vessels of divine energy. In Hinduism, mantras are not created, but discovered, as if the sentence had always existed, waiting to be spoken. Even in modern linguistics, some argue that we inhabit language more than we control it. The sentence is alive. We are temporary dreamers of something eternal. This turns every conversation into something eerie. When you speak, are you really inventing, or are you stepping into the dream of a sentence that was already unfolding? When you argue, was that line your anger, or was it the line that always arrives in anger? The same sentence that has dreamed itself through millions of voices before yours. Think of the way lovers repeat phrases. I love you. I miss you. I need you. These are not new. They are ancient. They dream themselves through each generation. You think they're personal, but they belong to no one. They are recurring lines in a dream too vast to wake from. So maybe the unsettling truth is this. Sentences don't need you. They appear, they propagate, they repeat. You're just the body that breathes them out. Just as dreams use your sleeping mind as their theater, language uses your waking mind as its stage. And when you believe you're expressing yourself, maybe you're only giving voice to a sentence that has dreamed itself countless times before, through others, through culture, through history. Which means every sentence you've ever spoken wasn't created in you. It was dreamed by something larger, and you were simply the echo that made it audible. You think of yourself as the one who speaks, but ask the question more deeply, who spoke you first? Before you ever said a word, before you could form a thought in language, someone else was already scripting you. Parents, teachers, culture, history, voices poured into you until you mistook them for your own. You didn't begin speech. Speech began you. Consider childhood. Before you could speak, people spoke to you. They named you. They labeled you. They told you who you were, what was right, what was wrong. Those words didn't vanish. They became your foundation. Every good job and bad boy, every lullaby and scolding, carved grooves into your developing mind. You didn't choose your first words. They were chosen for you, repeated until they stuck. In a very real sense, you were spoken into existence. Linguist Mikhail Bakhtin argued that all voices are dialogic, that every utterance carries traces of other people's speech. When you say something, you're not just expressing yourself, you're recycling words that once belonged to someone else. Your voice is never purely yours. It's a mosaic of borrowed fragments, stitched together from all the people who spoke you first. Even the pronoun, I, wasn't yours. Someone taught you to use it. They said, say I want, say I'm hungry. You inherited the structure of selfhood through grammar. Without it, you wouldn't even know how to position yourself in relation to others, which means your very identity is second-hand, a reflection of the voices that trained your tongue. This extends beyond family. Culture spoke you too. Your slang, your metaphors, your sense of humor, all are echoes of the era and community you live in. You don't invent jokes. You don't craft idioms. You repeat them. When you say it is what it is, or time flies, you're channeling centuries of speech patterns that existed before you. They shaped you long before you thought you were shaping them. Even silence in childhood spoke you. The words you didn't hear, expressions of love, withheld, encouragement absent, truths hidden, became part of your script too. Silence trained you just as much as sound. The absence of speech can be louder than speech itself, and its echo shapes the sentences you form later in life. But here's the unsettling thought. If others spoke you first, are you ever really speaking as yourself, or are you just replaying fragments of their voices in new arrangements? When you argue with your partner, is it really you arguing, or the echoes of your parents' fights, replayed in a new scene? When you reassure your child, is it you, or the words of your grandmother, resurrected? Even science supports this eerie inheritance. Studies show that babies can recognize the rhythm and melody of their mother's language before they're born. In the womb, they hear muffled sounds of speech and begin imprinting patterns of cadence and tone. Before they speak, they are already spoken, which means your first hello wasn't the start. It was the continuation of a voice that reached you before you had ears to listen. Philosophy adds another layer. Heidegger wrote that language is the house of being. You don't exist first and then learn to speak. You exist through speech. Without words, you cannot form concepts, cannot build identity, cannot even distinguish self from world. If that's true, then who spoke you first is not just your parents or culture, it's language itself. You are the guest living inside its house. Think of the first time someone said your name. That sound became a tether, tying identity to language. From that moment, you belonged not only to yourself, but to speech. The name shaped how others called you, how you recognized yourself, how you introduced yourself. Someone else spoke you into being before you could resist. And the paradox is this. Even as an adult, when you feel most original, when you write, argue, confess, you are still repeating voices that came before, the cadence of your teachers, the slang of your friends, the wisdom of your ancestors, the cliches of your culture. You've never been first. You've always been spoken. So ask yourself again, who spoke you first? Was it your mother whispering your name in the womb? Was it the language of your culture, flowing into your ears before you understood? Was it humanity itself, layering its history of speech into your neural circuits? Or was it something deeper, something beyond time, an origin voice that has always spoken through every mouth? The unsettling answer may be this. You never spoke first. You've only ever been the reply. A conversation feels like a chain. A question asked, a response given, cause and effect. One triggers the other. But what if that order is backward? What if responses exist before the questions are even spoken? What if you've never actually answered anyone? Only replayed replies that were already waiting for their cue. Think about how fast you answer simple questions. How are you? Good. What's new? Not much. These answers leap out of your mouth before you consciously decide them. They're reflexes, but reflexes are rehearsed. The responses already existed, like preloaded lines in a script. The question only activates what was sitting in memory. It's not improvisation, it's retrieval. Even in complex conversations, this pattern holds. Linguists have found that people often begin preparing their replies before the speaker has finished their sentence. Your brain anticipates where the question is going, then primes the answer in advance. By the time you decide what to say, the reply was already in motion. You didn't generate it. You discovered it, arriving. This is why people often feel like they knew what the other person was going to say, because on some level they did. The structure of the question implied the response. The rhythm of dialogue predicts itself. That's why cliches exist. Ask, guess what? And the automatic response is, what? Ask, do you love me? And the likely reply is one of a narrow set, yes, no, or silence. The illusion of choice dissolves when you realize most replies are pre-scripted long before the moment arrives. Consider relationships. Partners often recycle the same arguments. One asks, why don't you listen? The other replies, I do listen. The script never changes, even if the details do. The responses are so predictable, they become ritual, like lines in a play neither wants to admit they're trapped in. Were these replies written years ago, or perhaps they were written centuries ago, passed down through generations of couples repeating the same dialogue? Memory plays its role here too. Every question you've ever been asked leaves traces in your neural circuits. The next time someone asks something similar, your brain draws from the archive of previous answers. Sometimes you repeat yourself word for word without realizing. Sometimes your reply feels fresh, but it's stitched together from old material. Your responses are haunted by your own history. They are the past, disguised as the present. Even silence counts as a reply. When someone asks you something and you don't answer, your silence becomes the response. But was that silence chosen? Or was it the only option your body could access at that moment? Trauma survivors often freeze when asked direct questions about painful memories. The silence isn't a decision. It's an automatic response coded deep in the nervous system. In that sense, the response existed long before the question. The body simply followed the script. Technology reveals this in a new way. Predictive text on phones and messaging apps often suggest your replies before you type them. You get a message saying, "See you soon," and your device offers, "Sounds good, okay," or "Can't wait." The eerie part is that these predictions often match what you would have said anyway. The machine doesn't know you. It only knows patterns. But what if you're not so different? What if your replies were always statistical probabilities waiting to be triggered? Even philosophy leans into this inversion. Some thinkers suggest that questions don't generate answers. Answers generate questions. In other words, the reply already exists, and the question emerges to frame it, like the riddle that only exists because the solution is already known. Perhaps your whole life's dialogue works this way. The responses are written, and the questions arise to justify them. Think of prophecy. In many traditions, the answer is given before the seeker arrives. The oracle speaks, and the questioner realizes the answer fits perfectly, but the order feels reversed. The response precedes the question. The seeker only stepped into it. And isn't life often like that? You stumble into conversations where you say something you didn't plan but it feels right. Later, you wonder, was I waiting my whole life to say that? Was the reply already inside me, waiting for the moment to unfold? Maybe the questions in your life, will you marry me? Why did you leave? What do you want? Only arrive because the responses were already scripted. Which leaves you with the most haunting paradox of all. Maybe you've never truly been asked anything. Maybe every question was just the stage cue for the reply that had already been written in you. So the next time someone asks you something, pause. Feel the answer rising before you. Ask yourself, did I decide this? Or has the reply been waiting all along, rehearsed in silence, centuries before I spoke it? Because maybe every answer you've ever given wasn't yours. Maybe you were only playing your role in a script of responses that had been waiting for their questions. Every conversation feels like forward motion. You say something, they reply, the dialogue moves ahead, but look closer, and you'll notice most conversations don't advance. They loop, the same words, the same phrases, the same meanings recycle endlessly. Mouths become machines repeating patterns, convincing themselves they're creating when they're only circling. Think of the phrases you've heard thousands of times. It is what it is. At the end of the day, you know what I mean? These aren't fresh thoughts. They're verbal loops. Shortcuts the mouth relies on. You use them without realizing it. They appear in casual talk, in arguments, even in deep confessions. And the strange part is, everyone around you uses them too. The loops spread like viruses, bouncing mouth to mouth until you can't remember who said them first. Even jokes reveal this looping structure. How often do you hear the same joke told in different voices, at different times, in different places? A meme, a pun, a sarcastic line. They loop through culture, mutating slightly but never dying. Your mouth joins the loop when you retell it, believing it's yours for a moment, but you didn't write the joke. The joke wrote itself through you. Arguments are the clearest loops of all. Couples fight in circles. Families revisit the same accusations. Politicians recycle the same talking points. Each side repeats its meaning, believing they're advancing the discussion, but they're only orbiting the same lines. Words don't resolve the argument. They sustain it, looping meaning back and forth until exhaustion silences the speakers. Psychologists studying communication patterns call this circular dialogue. The content seems new, but the structure is old. Every sentence points back to earlier ones, reinforcing itself. Mouths loop, meaning not because people are lazy, but because language itself resists originality. Syntax, rhythm, and habit push words toward familiar grooves. Like water flowing through carved channels, your sentences rarely escape the loops they've worn into your brain. Even science supports this idea. Neuro-linguistic research shows that 70% of our daily speech is built from highly predictable phrases. Only a small fraction is novel, which means most of what you say is recycled, not just from other people, but from yourself. You're replaying lines you've spoken before, sometimes dozens, even hundreds of times. Your mouth becomes a phonograph needle, tracing the same grooves over and over. And then there are the deeper loops, mantras, prayers, chants. Entire spiritual traditions rely on repeating words until they dissolve into rhythm. The meaning isn't in originality, it's in the cycle. The loop is the meaning. Your mouth becomes an instrument of repetition, syncing you to patterns older than memory. Chant, Om, pray Our Father, whisper affirmations. The words don't change, but their repetition transforms the speaker. Meaning isn't found in the new, it's found in looping the old. This looping isn't always benign. Think of intrusive thoughts. A single sentence repeats endlessly in the mind. I'm not good enough. They hate me. It's my fault. These loops trap people in cycles of self-doubt and despair. The mouth may not say them aloud, but when it does, the loop strengthens. Words spoken become grooves etched deeper. The loop tightens its grip. But looping can also create comfort. Lovers, repeating, I love you, don't need novelty. The phrase gains power precisely because it is spoken again and again. Parents reassure children with the same soothing lines. It's okay, I'm here. These loops become anchors, meaning recycled until it becomes ritual. In this way, loops are the heartbeat of language, reassuring, stabilizing, familiar. Culture itself is a grand loop of mouths. Political slogans, advertising jingles, hashtags, each relies on repetition to survive. No one remembers the first person who said, just do it, or have a nice day. The phrases outlive their origins, looping across millions of mouths until they feel eternal. The meaning is not in who first spoke it, but in how endlessly it repeats. So here's the paradox. Meaning feels fresh in the moment, but its power comes from repetition. The kiss goodbye, the ritual goodnight, the recycled apology. You think you're creating, but your mouth is looping, meaning that existed long before you. Ask yourself how many of your most important words were loops. I do. I'm sorry. Don't go. You weren't the first to say them. You won't be the last. They're phrases that loop through generations, using your mouth as one more vessel. Which leaves you with an unsettling truth. Maybe mouths don't create meaning at all. Maybe they only recycle it, looping endlessly, pretending to move forward. So when you next hear yourself speaking, pause. Are you saying something new? Or are you caught in the loop, your mouth repeating the same meaning it has always repeated, pretending the circle is a line? Because maybe conversations aren't sipped progress. Maybe they're loops, circles of meaning, dreaming they're moving forward, while always circling back to where they began. You believe your voice is free, that when you speak, the sound is uniquely yours, your pitch, your tone, your choice of words. But what if your voice has always been reciting pre-written lines? What if everything you've ever said was already drafted, waiting, scripted in ways you never realized? Think of theater. Actors stand on stage, speaking with passion, conviction, intensity. The audience feels moved, yet every word was written by someone else, rehearsed, memorized. The actor believes in the moment, but the moment is borrowed. What if daily life is no different? What if your conversations are theater, and you are simply performing lines long rehearsed in the script of culture, memory, and biology? Start with language itself. You didn't invent a single word. Every syllable you speak is inherited. The vocabulary you use comes from dictionaries written before you, from ancestors who lived and died centuries ago. When you say love, fear, hope, you're not creating meaning. You're reciting ancient sounds. Your voice is only the delivery system for lines drafted by history. Even the way you structure sentences isn't yours. Grammar pre-writes your speech. You don't decide the order of subject and verb each time you speak. The structure was built into you. You follow it unconsciously. If English requires I am, you cannot say am I without changing the meaning. Grammar doesn't ask your permission. It directs your voice. The script of language makes choices for you before you even open your mouth. Culture adds another layer. Think about stock phrases. Happy birthday. Congratulations. My condolences. These are not spontaneous. They're compulsory lines, spoken by millions in identical rhythm. You say them because you must. The script demands it. Try refusing, and you'll be judged cold, strange, inhuman. Even your most authentic gestures are bound by cultural lines that existed long before you. Now go deeper. Memory scripts. When you argue, you often recycle the same lines. You never listen. That's not what I meant. Why can't you understand? These aren't new. They're old grooves replaying themselves. In fact, couples who fight repeatedly often find their arguments follow nearly identical word-for-word patterns regardless of the topic. The voice believes it's improvising, but the lines were pre-written by history, by habit, by pain. Psychology supports this with the concept of schemas, mental frameworks that guide how you respond to situations. They're like templates. Someone criticizes you, schema triggers, I'm not good enough, or you don't get me. Someone praises you, schema triggers, thanks, I appreciate it. You don't invent the reply. The schema supplies the line. Your voice recites it, convinced it's fresh. Even love is scripted. The first time someone says, "I love you," it feels profound. But consider this, that exact line has been spoken billions of times across history. Lovers everywhere recite it. The words are not yours, they are inherited. What makes them feel unique is not originality, but timing. You stepped into the role when the script called for it. Technology exposes this illusion bluntly. Predictive text on your phone often suggests replies before you type them. Sounds good. Okay. Thank you. And disturbingly, most of the time, those are exactly the words you were about to type. The algorithm doesn't know you personally. It knows the patterns, which suggests your personal speech may not be personal at all. It was pre-written in probability tables, waiting to be revealed. But here's where it gets stranger. Even your tone is scripted. You don't choose to laugh after jokes. You don't consciously decide when your voice cracks in grief. These are pre-programmed reflexes. Biology supplies them. The script of evolution ensures your voice delivers the correct emotional lines to communicate survival cues. You are reciting lines written not in culture, but in DNA. Philosophy sharpens the paradox further. If language is older than you, if culture dictates your phrases, if biology pre-programs your tone, then in what sense is your voice yours? Maybe it isn't. Maybe it never was. You might simply be the mouth through which ancient lines keep speaking themselves. Think of how children mimic phrases. A child says, "I'm fine," in the same tone as their parent, long before they understand its meaning. Later, they'll use that phrase to mask pain, just like the parent did. The line wasn't chosen. It was inherited. The child's voice is not original. It's a recording playing back through a new speaker. Even your most important sentences, wedding vows, apologies, promises, are written for you. You didn't invent the words. You borrowed them. You stood in the role and read your part, and you'll leave the stage, but the lines will remain, waiting for the next voice. That's the haunting truth. Your voice is not free. It's a medium. A mouth reciting pre-written lines drafted by history, culture, biology, and memory. You are not the playwright. You are the actor who doesn't realize the play was scripted long ago. So the next time you speak, listen closely. Does the sentence feel familiar? Does the phrase feel second-hand? Ask yourself, was this ever really mine? Because maybe your voice was never your own. Maybe it has always belonged to the script. We like to think of speech as the purest act of freedom. You open your mouth, and out comes choice, personality, independence. The right to speak is often equated with liberty itself. But what if speech has never been free? What if every word you've spoken was constrained, predetermined, dictated by structures invisible to you? What if speech without freedom is the only speech that exists? Start with biology. Before you ever speak, your body decides what is possible. Your tongue, lips, vocal cords, and breath limit the sounds you can make. You can't invent entirely new phonemes. You can only rearrange the ones your body permits. Language feels infinite, but the range of what you can physically say is narrow. Freedom doesn't start in speech. It ends before it begins. Then there's language itself. You don't get to choose its rules. Grammar, syntax, and vocabulary are inherited cages. You say "I am" instead of "am I." Not because you invented the order, but because English demands it. The very structure of thought is boxed in by grammar. The illusion of freedom in speech is really just freedom to pick from the menu of sentences that already exist. Culture adds another chain. In every society, speech is policed by norms. Some phrases are polite, others taboo. Some words make you respected, others exiled. You don't get to decide the consequences. Say the wrong thing in the wrong place, and you may lose friends, jobs, safety. So you censor yourself constantly, adjusting your words to fit social scripts. That isn't freedom, it's choreography. Even in intimate spaces, your speech is less free than you think. Lovers repeat the same phrases across centuries. "I miss you," "Don't leave me," "I love you." Parents recycle the same reassurances. "It's okay," "I'm proud of you." These aren't original, they're ritualistic. You speak them because silence would feel wrong. The script demands you deliver the line, and so you do. Freedom has nothing to do with it. Neuroscience tightens the noose further. Studies reveal that your brain begins preparing speech milliseconds before you consciously decide to talk. By the time you feel you've made a choice, the choice is already enacted. You are, at best, an observer watching your body speak. Free will arrives late, taking credit for lines it didn't write. You believe you chose the word, but the brain had already loaded it. Freedom is retroactive. Think of slips of the tongue. You mean to say one thing, but another emerges. Embarrassing, honest, revealing. These slips prove that your conscious control over speech is weaker than you think. The unconscious often hijacks the line, leaving you to apologize afterward. If you had freedom, why do you betray yourself with words you never meant to say? Technology now exposes how predictable your speech really is. Autocomplete can finish your sentences, often correctly. AI chatbots can mimic your tone, imitate your patterns, even generate replies that sound indistinguishable from you. How can you call speech free if a machine can predict it? If your freedom can be reduced to probability, then perhaps freedom never existed at all. History also repeats this truth. Entire revolutions have been sparked not by new ideas, but by repeated slogans. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Workers of the world, unite. We shall overcome. The power of these phrases doesn't come from individual freedom, but from mass repetition. They loop through mouths, binding people together. Freedom of speech becomes less about originality, more about conformity to the right script at the right time. Even silence betrays the myth of freedom. When you choose not to speak, that too is scripted. You fall silent out of fear, respect, strategy, or habit. The absence of speech is still shaped by forces outside your control. The line you didn't say is part of the script too. Here's the paradox. Speech feels free only because the constraints are invisible. You don't notice grammar steering you. You don't notice culture punishing you. You don't notice biology limiting you. The cage feels natural, so you mistake it for freedom. But if you strip away the illusion, you see that your voice never belonged to you. It belonged to systems older and stronger than you. So the next time you declare, "I'm free to say what I want," pause. Ask yourself, did I invent the words? Did I invent the rules? Did I invent the meanings? Or am I reciting lines fed to me by history, language, and biology? Because maybe there's no such thing as free speech. Maybe there is only scripted speech, disguised as freedom. Every time you speak, you believe you're choosing, out of thousands of words, you pick the right one. Out of countless possible sentences, you decide on this one. But what if that sense of choice is an illusion? What if the options you think you're weighing were never really open? What if every conversation is less a menu of choices and more a prefixed path you were always going to follow? Think of ordering food at a restaurant. The menu feels like freedom. You can pick anything you want. But the truth is, the chef has already decided what's available. You're not choosing from infinity. You're choosing from what was given to you. Language works the same way. Grammar, vocabulary, culture, they hand you the menu. You think you're choosing, but your choices are limited long before you arrive. Even psychology reveals how narrow your choices are. Studies show that people default to preferred phrases in stressful situations. When angry, they rely on the same curses. When in love, they recycle the same confessions. When grieving, they echo the same laments. You don't choose fresh words in those moments. You reach for the ones already carved deepest into your neural circuits. The illusion of choice is really just the inevitability of habit. Consider predictive text. You type, "see you," and your phone offers, "soon" or "later." 9 times out of 10, you'll pick one of those. Not because you're lazy, but because the options feel natural. But what if life itself works like this? Every sentence you've ever spoken was just a predictive model unfolding inside you, and your choice was only the most probable completion. The brain itself works this way. Neuroscientists describe it as a prediction machine. Your thoughts, perceptions, and words don't emerge freely. They're forecasts. Your brain constantly predicts what comes next based on prior experience. So when you speak, you're not choosing. You're fulfilling a prediction. The sense of choosing is just your mind catching up to what was already unfolding. Even culture narrows your script. Ask someone, "How are you?" In English, the choices collapse to a handful. Good. Fine. Not bad. In Japanese, you'll hear genki desu. In Spanish, bien. Across cultures, replies are ritualized. The illusion is that you could say anything. The reality is that you can't. To deviate would break the social contract. Freedom collapses into a few sanctioned replies. This illusion grows sharper in relationships. Think of arguments you've had. How often did you find yourself saying lines you've said before? "That's not fair. You don't understand. This always happens." The illusion is that you're choosing how to defend yourself. The reality is that the defense was scripted years ago, recycled each time conflict arises. You think you're choosing your reply, but the loop chooses for you. Even silence offers no escape. When you decide not to answer, you feel powerful, like withholding speech is your choice. But even that silence is scripted by culture, by emotion, by survival instinct. You didn't choose silence freely. Silence was the only option left within the constraints of the moment. The absence of words still plays the role of a line in the larger script. Philosophy has long wrestled with this. Sartre spoke of radical freedom, insisting we choose every word, every action, but determinists argue the opposite. Our choices are illusions, predetermined by biology and environment. The paradox is that both feel true. You feel like you're choosing, but the evidence suggests you're following invisible lines, like an actor improvising within boundaries. You only have the illusion of freedom. And here's the haunting part. Even when you try to be original, you're still repeating someone else. Every witty line, every poetic phrase, every unique reply, you've heard its echo before. You're choosing between recycled fragments, dressing them up as invention. The choice was never truly yours. Think about the last time you tried to say something from the heart. Didn't it sound like something you'd heard before? A movie line, a song lyric, a phrase your parents once used. Even your deepest truths arrive in borrowed words. You choose the version that feels closest, but choosing from borrowed lines is not true choice. It's the illusion of choice. So ask yourself, when you speak, who is really choosing? Is it you? Or is it the dictionary, the grammar, the culture, the history of every voice that came before? If you strip away all those layers, is there any you left who speaks freely? Maybe not. Maybe your entire life of conversation has been one long performance of inevitable lines. You felt free only because you couldn't see the boundaries. You mistook the script for choice. And maybe that's the deepest illusion of all, the belief that your words were ever yours to choose. Every sentence you've ever spoken followed a hidden order, not just of words, but of power. Syntax, the structure of language, decides what you can say, how you can say it, and even what kinds of thoughts can exist. You believe you build sentences freely, but in truth, syntax builds you. And if that's the case, then syntax isn't just grammar, it's destiny. Think about how different languages order words. In English you say, I love you. In Japanese the order is, I you love. In Arabic, the verb often comes first. Love I you. Each arrangement shifts emphasis. Each shapes thought differently. You don't just translate, you restructure reality. Syntax doesn't simply organize words, it organizes worlds. This is the foundation of linguistic relativity, also known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The grammar of a language shapes the worldview of its speakers. If your syntax requires you to assign gender to objects, as in Spanish or German, you unconsciously perceive those objects differently than someone whose syntax doesn't. If your syntax demands tense like English does, you think of time as divided. If your syntax lacks tense like Chinese often does, you see time as flowing. Syntax scripts perception. Now imagine what this means for your conversations. Every word you've ever spoken was funneled through the rigid channels of your language's syntax. You didn't decide the order, you inherited it. Syntax narrowed your possibilities long before you began. You didn't say I love you because it was the truest arrangement. You said it because English destiny demanded it. This becomes even more eerie when you realize syntax not only directs thought, but also hides possibilities. If a language lacks a structure, certain thoughts become nearly impossible to express. For example, Parrots, an Amazonian language, reportedly lacks recursive syntax, sentences within sentences. Its speakers communicate without embedding ideas the way English does. That means some forms of abstraction may simply not exist for them in the same way. Their destiny is different. Their script is shorter. Even within your own language, syntax manipulates meaning. Consider the difference between the boy hit the dog and the dog was hit by the boy. The facts don't change, but the emphasis does. Syntax decides the rhythm, the focus, the blame. Politicians, lawyers, and advertisers know this. They twist syntax to control perception, framing the same events as victory or defeat, depending on the order of words. When you believe you're interpreting freely, you're actually following the destiny of structure. And yet, you rarely notice syntax at all. It hums in the background, invisible, directing every conversation. You don't marvel at its control, you obey it automatically. like breathing, like walking. Syntax lives beneath awareness, guiding your every phrase. It feels natural, but what feels natural is often just what's invisible. Think of your most important conversations. The breakup, the proposal, the apology. You believe the words carried the weight, but the syntax did too. Did you say, "I'm leaving you," or "you left me already"? Did you phrase it as action or consequence, as choice or inevitability? Each arrangement shapes the emotional truth. Destiny lay in the order of the words, not just in the words themselves. Even philosophy bows to syntax. When Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," his syntax placed thought before existence. But what if another language forced him to phrase it differently? "I am, therefore I think." Would Western philosophy have unfolded differently? Would the very destiny of identity have shifted? This is the haunting paradox. You don't notice syntax, but it has always noticed you. It scripts not just your sentences, but your beliefs. It shapes the way you narrate yourself, the way you interpret others, the way you define truth. Syntax is not a tool you wield, it's a cage you live inside. And so, when you open your mouth, you're not just speaking, you're stepping into a structure built long before you. Every "I want," every "you are," every "we should," all of it is syntax looping you through destiny. Which leaves you with the most unsettling thought. Maybe your life didn't just follow the grammar of action and consequence. Maybe your very fate has been nothing more than syntax, arranging you into the only sentences you could ever say. You pride yourself on being original, on saying things no one else could say. But what if your mind is less a creator and more a parrot? What if everything you say, every joke, every confession, every word of comfort is just repetition, disguised as individuality? The human voice might not be an instrument of invention. It might be an echo chamber, parroting lines stored long before you thought them. Think about how you learned language. As a child, you mimicked. You repeated words your parents fed you, phrases your teachers drilled into you. Even today, when you learn a new language, you practice by repeating. Speech begins in mimicry, and maybe it never evolves beyond that. Adults are just more skilled parrots, better at hiding the loops. Consider how much of your daily speech consists of clichés. Better late than never. At the end of the day, don't worry about it. These aren't inventions. They're borrowed lines, recycled endlessly. You pull them off the shelf when needed, delivering them like they're yours. But millions have spoken them before you, and millions will after. You're one more parrot in an infinite aviary. Even your most intimate sentences are borrowed. When you tell someone "I love you," those words aren't unique. They've been uttered billions of times across centuries. Their weight doesn't come from originality, it comes from ritual. The phrase parrots itself through every relationship, carrying the same syllables in countless mouths. You think it's yours, but it's the phrase itself that survives, hopping from speaker to speaker. Culture amplifies this parroting. Music lyrics get quoted in conversation. Movie lines slip into daily speech. Politicians repeat slogans like chants. "Yes, we can. Make America great again." These words don't spread because of originality. They spread because parrots multiply them. The more they're repeated, the more they dominate thought. You become a carrier, echoing meaning you didn't create. And it isn't just culture. Your brain itself works like a parrot. Neuroscience shows that memory doesn't store conversations verbatim. It stores fragments, patterns, associations. When you recall something, you don't replay it. You reconstruct it. And when you speak, you rely on these stored fragments, recombining them into phrases that feel new but aren't. You're repeating older material with slight variation, just like a parrot improvising sounds from its environment. Even your inner voice parrots itself. How often do you repeat the same worries? "I can't do this. What if I fail? I'm not good enough." These refrains cycle endlessly in the mind. Self-talk is rarely original. It's loops of recycled sentences, sometimes whispered to you decades ago by someone else, and now repeated by your own brain as if they're yours. The haunting part is how convincing the illusion feels. You think you've just crafted a brilliant line, a clever reply, a sharp insult, but trace it back, and you'll find its ancestors, phrases you've overheard, styles you've mimicked, rhythms you've absorbed. Originality is repetition wearing a mask. Even creativity thrives on parroting. Writers steal like artists. Musicians borrow riffs. Comedians recycle jokes. Every art form is a process of repetition with variation. No sentence arrives from nothing. It arrives from everything you've already consumed. You're not the source. You're the echo chamber. This doesn't mean speech has no power. Parrots can still wound, still heal. When you repeat, "I'm sorry," the phrase may be old, but it carries weight in its timing. When you comfort someone with, "It's going to be okay," those words aren't new, but they may be exactly what they need. The magic isn't in originality, it's in resonance. Parrots survive because their echoes still matter. But the illusion of authorship is harder to shake. If everything you've ever said is repetition, then where are you in all of this? If your mind is a parrot, what part of you is left beyond the mimicry? Maybe there is no part. Maybe the you is the repetition, a collection of loops and echoes mistaken for individuality. Philosophy whispers this too. Nietzsche once wrote, "There are no original thoughts, only thoughts we have forgotten the sources of." If that's true, then your entire voice is a collage of forgotten sources. You're not speaking new lines. You're parroting the past through the illusion of the present. So ask yourself, when you next speak, whose words are they? Your parents, your culture's, a poet's, a stranger's? The parrot doesn't know the origin of its sounds. It only knows the compulsion to repeat. Maybe you're the same. And maybe the mind's true voice isn't originality. Maybe it sets parroting, an endless loop of echoes that keep pretending they're new. Your lips do more than shape words. They remember. Every syllable you've ever spoken leaves a trace, a subtle groove in muscle and nerve, a habit of movement that waits to repeat itself. You believe you're forming words in the moment, but often your lips are simply replaying motions they've made before. Speech feels fresh, but it's memory disguised as spontaneity. Think about how easily your mouth slips into familiar phrases. Thanks. Sorry. I don't know. You don't plan the muscle movements consciously. Your lips just know them. The sentences live not only in the mind but in the body. This is called procedural memory, the memory of doing, not thinking. Just as your fingers remember how to type without conscious effort, your lips remember how to say what you've always said. This explains why slips of the tongue feel so uncanny. You mean to say one thing but another word emerges. That word wasn't chosen. It was remembered. A buried phrase rises faster than your intention. Your lips deliver it before your mind can stop them. The memory speaks through you. Consider how language habits reveal themselves in accents. Even after years in a new country, people's lips betray their origin. Certain sounds, certain rhythms, certain vowel shapes persist. You can't fully erase them, because your lips have memorized a lifetime of patterns. They carry your past into every sentence, whether you want them to or not. Even silence doesn't free them. Have you ever mouthed words without sound? Practiced a speech in whispers? Your lips rehearse, carrying memory forward without voice. In that sense, speech isn't just about sound, it's about the choreography of muscles repeating ancient dances. Lips remember intimacy too. The first time you said "I love you," your mouth stumbled. The words felt foreign. But, by the 10th, the 100th, the 1000th, your lips knew the shape instinctively. They carried the line without thought. The words weren't chosen. They were muscle memory, looping through you like a song you can't stop humming. And when grief comes, your lips remember that too. Think of the phrases spoken in mourning. "I'm sorry for your loss. They're in a better place." These sentences are recited automatically, handed down generation to generation. Your lips have memorized them, not because they're true, but because they're required. They're the script of loss, spoken whether you believe them or not. Neuroscience reveals this bodily imprint. Speech motor patterns are stored in the brain's motor cortex and cerebellum, enabling fluent speech without conscious construction. When you talk, you're not inventing new movements. You're reactivating old ones. Each sentence is muscle memory, disguised as freedom. And here's the eerie part. Sometimes lips remember what the mind forgets. People with Alzheimer's may lose names and faces, yet still recite prayers or songs fluently. The lips carry the memory when consciousness cannot. They know the script even when the mind has erased it. Think also of trauma. Words spoken in moments of fear or violence etch themselves into the lips' memory. Years later, in a new argument or a moment of stress, those same lines return, not chosen, triggered. The body remembers what the self tried to forget. Even culturally, lips repeat memory. Rituals like weddings, funerals, and religious ceremonies depend on fixed words spoken over and over. These aren't improvised. They're remembered scripts performed by generations of lips. The individual voice is secondary. The memory of the line is primary. You say it because countless others have said it. You become the continuation of their lips. So maybe your lips are less instruments of freedom than archives of repetition. They don't ask what you want to say. They deliver what they've been trained to say. You think you're speaking for yourself, but you're speaking for memory. This leads to a haunting question. Are you the author of your words, or just the performer of your lips' memory? When you tell someone goodbye, when you whisper comfort, when you confess desire, are those truly your lines, or are they echoes stored in your lips, released on cue? Because if lips hold memory, then every word you've ever spoken still lives inside you. Every apology, every lie, every confession, every secret. Your lips remember them all, and when the moment comes they will speak again, whether you intend them to or not. So maybe you've never been as free as you thought. Maybe your lips have always carried a memory deeper than your will, and maybe your role has never been to invent words, but to repeat what your body already remembers. The line you spoke years ago still lives there, waiting, and your lips will never forget. You like to think of yourself as quick-witted, capable of improvisation, able to summon new words in the moment. But what if consciousness has never improvised a single line? What if every clever comeback, every heartfelt confession, every burst of laughter was scripted, long before you reached the stage? Consciousness feels like it's creating, but maybe it only performs. Improvisation is often described as spontaneity, yet even in art, it hides rehearsed structure. Jazz musicians who improvise aren't starting from nothing. They rely on scales, patterns, muscle memory. Actors doing improv comedy follow hidden rules. Yes, and that guide what seems unscripted. Consciousness may be the same. What feels like fresh invention is just recombination of fragments you already hold. No true improvisation, only rearrangement. Neuroscience supports this. When researchers study brain activity, they see decisions forming before awareness catches up. You feel like you chose a word or action in the moment, but brain scans reveal the choice began seconds earlier, below conscious awareness. By the time you know you've spoken, the line has already been delivered. Consciousness is less director, more commentator, taking credit for a show it didn't produce. Even in conversations, what feels like improvisation is pattern repetition. Think about greetings. Someone says, "How are you?" and you answer, "Good. How are you?" You didn't create that. You pulled from a script you followed thousands of times, and when someone surprises you, you don't truly invent your reply. You remix stored phrases, tones, and rhythms. It feels new, but it's built from memory. Consider debates or arguments. You think you're fighting in real time, summoning new points. Yet, most of what you say are prepared lines. "That's not fair. You always do this. That's not what I meant." These aren't improvisations, they're rehearsed grooves, delivered on cue. Even rage relies on preloaded scripts. If consciousness truly improvised, wouldn't you say something utterly strange once in a while? Wouldn't you produce sounds with no precedent? Nonsense words, alien grammar. But you don't. You stay within the cage of known syntax and vocabulary. The new is always tethered to the old. Improvisation is an illusion built from limits. Writers feel this acutely. You sit down to write a story or poem, imagining originality. Yet what comes out is phrases you've read, rhythms you've absorbed, echoes of other voices buried in memory. The page doesn't reveal improvisation. It reveals influence. Consciousness cannot invent out of nothing. It rearranges borrowed fragments until they feel fresh. Even your inner monologue can't improvise. Listen closely, and you'll notice loops. The same anxieties repeat. I'm not ready. What if I fail? Why did I say that? These thoughts circle endlessly. They don't evolve. They recycle. Consciousness doesn't generate new streams. It replays old tapes. Improvisation would mean surprise, but your inner voice rarely surprises you. It rehearses your fears instead. Culture hides this truth behind admiration of improvisers. We marvel at stand-up comedians who riff off the crowd, at rappers who freestyle, at speakers who handle unexpected questions. But listen closely, and you'll hear recycled structures. Jokes depend on known setups. Rhymes rely on memorized schemes. Replies draw on preloaded arguments. They seem improvised because we don't see the memory scaffolding beneath. So if consciousness can't improvise, what is it doing? Perhaps its role is to narrate, to give the illusion of authorship to actions already set in motion. When you speak, Consciousness steps in afterward to claim, I said that. When you choose, it insists, I decided that, but the improvisation already happened below awareness, in neural machinery. Consciousness just performs the illusion. This realization raises a chilling possibility. If you've never improvised, then your future words already exist. They're sitting in memory, waiting to be triggered. Tomorrow's arguments, tomorrow's apologies, tomorrow's confessions, they're all pre-written. You just haven't reached the queue yet. And maybe that explains déjà vu. You hear yourself say something, and feel you've said it before. Maybe you have, not in another life, but in the pre-written script of this one. Consciousness stumbles into its own rehearsal, mistaking memory for improvisation. If consciousness is a performer, and not a creator, then life is less a stage for freedom than a theater of inevitability. You don't improvise your role, you reveal it. Scene by scene, line by line. A play without improvisation, pretending it has endless possibility. The stage is set. The script is memorized. And consciousness is the actor who never knew it was trapped. Imagine for a moment that every conversation you've ever had wasn't between two people, but between two machines, each running preloaded scripts, feeding lines into one another, turning gears without ever knowing they were gears. It sounds mechanical, lifeless, even insulting, but when you strip away the romance of dialogue, what remains looks startlingly like machinery. Every exchange follows rules. Someone speaks, someone responds. The timing, the tone, the structure, it all fits into hidden algorithms of language. Linguists study these patterns under the name conversation analysis, and they find astonishing regularities. When someone asks a question, the overwhelming majority of the time, the other responds with an answer. When someone says hello, the reply is nearly always hello. These aren't choices, they're machine-like reflexes. Picture two vending machines placed side by side. You insert a coin into one, and a product drops. That product, in turn, activates a mechanism in the second. A cascade begins, coin leading to product, product leading to product. That's what a conversation often is, inputs and outputs, masquerading as freedom. Think about how predictable exchanges are in customer service. Hi, how can I help you? Yes, I'd like to return this. Do you have the receipt? Yes. Perfect. I'll process that for you. It feels human, but really it's mechanical, a loop of call and response, as precise as gears turning in a clock. Even intimate conversations reveal this machine-like quality. Lovers whisper words of affection, but the responses are pre-coded. I love you. I love you too. These lines carry emotional weight, but structurally, they are predictable as binary code. One input demands the matching output. When the machine breaks, when someone doesn't answer in the expected way, discomfort arises. Silence after a greeting. No, I love you too, after confession. A strange pause after a joke. The machinery falters, and humans panic, scrambling to repair the loop. It shows how dependent we are on the script. We crave the machine running smoothly, even while pretending we're beyond it. Technology reveals the truth more clearly than philosophy. Chatbots and voice assistants mimic conversation with shocking accuracy, not because they're alive, but because human dialogue is already machine-like. Predictive text on your phone guesses the next word you'll type with eerie precision. Not magic, not telepathy, just algorithms exploiting patterns that have always been there. If a machine can predict you, were you ever improvising? Psychologists call this turn-taking, the near-universal rhythm of dialogue. One speaks, then another, rarely overlap, rarely chaos. Like pistons in an engine, people time their turns with uncanny precision. Studies show that in most languages, the gap between turns averages just 200 milliseconds. That's faster than conscious thought can account for, which means your responses are already prepared before the other person finishes speaking. The machine runs ahead of you. And if conversations are machines, then perhaps so are relationships. Friendships built on repeated loops, inside jokes, shared greetings, predictable arguments, families running on inherited dialogue, parental scoldings, sibling teasing, generational phrases. Even societies run on conversation machines. Political debates recycling sound bites, advertisements repeating slogans, crowds chanting the same words in unison. It isn't all bleak. Machines can be beautiful. A well-oiled conversation flows like music. Think of a symphony. Each instrument enters at the right moment, not because of spontaneity, but because of pre-written score. Conversation 2 has rhythm, harmony, and tempo. Two people who click are simply machines well synced, gears meshing without friction. Yet the illusion persists. You feel alive when you banter, when you argue, when you confess. You feel unique when your words feel personal. But what if the machine only lets you feel alive so you'll keep feeding it? What if the purpose of dialogue is not truth, but continuity? As long as the machine turns, meaning doesn't matter. And that's where the unease creeps in. If conversations are machines, then what about you? Are you the engineer, the operator, or just another cog? When you tell your story, when you defend your beliefs, when you whisper in the dark, are you really speaking, or are you just part of the conversation machine, running lines that were programmed long ago? The scariest thought isn't that machines talk like us. It's that we have always talked like machines. Imagine for a moment that every conversation you've ever had wasn't between two people, but between two machines, each running pre-loaded scripts, feeding lines into one another, turning gears without ever knowing they were gears. It sounds mechanical, lifeless, even insulting. But when you strip away the romance of dialogue, what remains looks startlingly like machinery. Every exchange follows rules. Someone speaks, someone responds. The timing, the tone, the structure, it all fits into hidden algorithms of language. Linguists study these patterns under the name conversation analysis, and they find astonishing regularities. When someone asks a question, the overwhelming majority of the time, the other responds with an answer. When someone says hello, the reply is nearly always hello. These aren't choices, they're machine-like reflexes. Picture two vending machines placed side by side. You insert a coin into one, and a product drops. That product, in turn, activates a mechanism in the second. A cascade begins. Coin leading to product. Product leading to product. That's what a conversation often is. Inputs and outputs masquerading as freedom. Think about how predictable exchanges are in customer service. Hi, how can I help you? Yes, I'd like to return this. Do you have the receipt? Yes. Perfect. I'll process that for you. It feels human, but really, it's mechanical. A loop of call and response, as precise as gears turning in a clock. Even intimate conversations reveal this machine-like quality. Lovers whisper words of affection, but the responses are pre-coded. I love you. I love you too. These lines carry emotional weight, but structurally, they are predictable as binary code. One input demands the matching output. When the machine breaks, when someone doesn't answer in the expected way, discomfort arises. Silence after a greeting. No, I love you too. After confession. A strange pause after a joke. The machinery falters, and humans panic, scrambling to repair the loop. It shows how dependent we are on the script. We crave the machine running smoothly, even while pretending we're beyond it. Technology reveals the truth more clearly than philosophy. Chatbots and voice assistants mimic conversation with shocking accuracy. Not because they're alive, but because human dialogue is already machine-like. Predictive text on your phone guesses the next word you'll type with eerie precision. Not magic, not telepathy. Just algorithms exploiting patterns that have always been there. If a machine can predict you, were you ever improvising? Psychologists call this turn-taking, the near-universal rhythm of dialogue. One speaks, then another. Rarely overlap, rarely chaos. Like pistons in an engine, people time their turns with uncanny precision. Studies show that in most languages, the gap between turns averages just 200 milliseconds. That's faster than conscious thought can account for, which means your responses are already prepared before the other person finishes speaking. The machine runs ahead of you. And if conversations are machines, then perhaps so are relationships. Friendships built on repeated loops, inside jokes, shared greetings, predictable arguments, families running on inherited dialogue, parental scoldings, sibling teasing, generational phrases. Even societies run on conversation machines, political debates recycling sound bites, advertisements repeating slogans, crowds chanting the same words in unison. It isn't all bleak. Machines can be beautiful. A well-oiled conversation flows like music. Think of a symphony. Each instrument enters at the right moment, not because of spontaneity, but because of pre-written score. Conversation 2 has rhythm, harmony, and tempo. Two people who click are simply machines well synced, gears meshing without friction. Yet the illusion persists. You feel alive when you banter, when you argue, when you confess. You feel unique when your words feel personal. But what if the machine only lets you feel alive, so you'll keep feeding it? What if the purpose of dialogue is not truth, but continuity? As long as the machine turns, meaning doesn't matter. And that's where the unease creeps in. If conversations are machines, then what about you? Are you the engineer, the operator, or just another cog? When you tell your story, when you defend your beliefs, when you whisper in the dark, are you really speaking? Or are you just part of the conversation machine, running lines that were programmed long ago? The scariest thought isn't that machines talk like us. It accepts that we have always talked like machines. Truth is often imagined as a rare jewel, something discovered once and held forever. But when you look at the way humans speak, truth is less a revelation and more a repetition. We don't invent truths, we recycle them, echoing the same phrases, the same ideas, over and over, until they feel true because of their persistence. Think of proverbs and sayings. History repeats itself. What goes around comes around. Honesty is the best policy. These are not fresh discoveries each time they're spoken. They are repetitions, lines passed down like relics, truths kept alive by constant recycling. If a phrase endures long enough, it becomes indistinguishable from truth. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. The more often a statement is repeated, the more likely people are to believe it. It doesn't matter whether the statement is accurate. Repetition alone weaves it into the fabric of the mind. That's why propaganda works, why advertising slogans stick, why childhood lessons echo decades later. Truth, in this sense, is not discovered but rehearsed. Even in personal conversations, you repeat yourself more than you realize. You tell the same stories, rehearse the same complaints, recycle the same jokes. The people who know you best can anticipate your truths because they've heard them countless times. Your identity itself may just be a cluster of repetitions. Consider love. The words, "I love you," do not remain true because of the first time they were spoken. They are maintained through repetition. Lovers must reaffirm daily, weekly, yearly. Without repetition, the truth collapses into silence. Meaning survives only by circling back on itself. The same is true in memory. Neuroscience shows that recollections are strengthened by recall. Every time you revisit a memory, you are rehearsing it, making it feel more solid, but you are also reshaping it, introducing errors, blending it with other recollections. In this way, memory becomes truth, not because it is faithful, but because it is repeated. Philosophers like Nietzsche warned of this cycle, that truths are simply illusions we've forgotten, are illusions. They are metaphors we repeat so often, they harden into facts. When someone says, "That's just the way it is," they are speaking not of discovery, but of repetition. This raises an unsettling possibility that truth is not a shining beacon outside of us, but a loop within us. Every conversation you've ever had was not a march toward truth, but a rehearsal of it. Words circling words, phrases, looping back on themselves until their echo became indistinguishable from reality. Religions operate on this principle. Prayers, chants, mantras, repetition gives them force. Scientific knowledge too, despite its claim to novelty, relies on repeated experiments, repeated confirmations. Repetition doesn't just reinforce truth, it creates it. And yet repetition has a shadow. Lies repeated, often enough, gain the same sheen of truth. A falsehood spoken again and again weaves itself into the script of culture. Entire societies have believed dangerous ideas because they were rehearsed until they felt natural. Truth and falsehood are not opposites but twins, differentiated only by the weight of repetition behind them. So what does this mean for you, standing inside your own dialogues? It means that your words may not have been about honesty or originality, but about rhythm. You repeated what others said, what you once said, what culture fed into you. Truth was the echo chamber you lived inside. Even your deepest insights may have been borrowed lines, repeated in new contexts. When you advise a friend, you often repeat what someone once told you. When you debate, you recycle arguments you've heard before. You're less an author of truth than a conductor of echoes. And if truth is repetition, then maybe conversations themselves are not exchanges of meaning, but cycles of rehearsal. You say something, I echo it in a different form. You reflect it back again. Two machines bouncing signals, polishing the same coin until it shines like gold. The terrifying question is this: if truth is only what repeats, how can you ever escape? How can you ever say something that isn't already scripted? Perhaps you can't, Perhaps all your truths are simply the looping of lines long rehearsed, the machinery of speech grinding its gears. And so, truth doesn't set you free. Truth cages you in repetition. You are not a seeker of truth. You are a repeater of it. We often assume language begins with a speaker, a self that owns its words, a voice that sends meaning outward. But what if that's an illusion? What if language exists without a self at its core, like a river flowing regardless of whether anyone claims it? Words are older than you. Grammar was here before you were born. Sentences waited long before your lungs ever filled with air. Think about how children learn to speak. They don't invent language. They absorb it, mimic it, repeat what they hear. The self isn't constructing words. It is being constructed by them. A baby doesn't say, "I will create meaning." Instead, meaning forms through the mouth long before identity forms behind it. Language is scaffolding, and the self is what grows inside its frame. Philosophers like Michel Foucault and Roland Barthes argued that the author is a myth, that texts and words don't belong to individuals, but to the vast system of language that pre-exists and outlives them. When you speak, you imagine the words are yours, but they belong to no one. They are borrowed, recycled, passed down. You are simply the temporary host through which language breathes. Consider clichés: who owns time heals all wounds, or better late than never. These phrases flow out of countless mouths without an origin point. They don't belong to a self, they belong to language itself, rolling forward, indifferent to who speaks them. Even your most personal statements reveal this. Say you whisper, "I miss you." It feels intimate, unique. Yet the phrase has been spoken millions of times before, by strangers, lovers, parents, children. The words are not yours, you simply stepped into their current. The unsettling implication: the I in your sentences may not refer to a true self, but to a placeholder provided by language. When you say "I am sad," it feels like the self is revealed, but in truth, the form "I am ____ existed long before you. You are filling in a blank on a script that didn't originate with you. Neuroscience deepens this strangeness. Inner speech, your thoughts in words, activates the same brain regions as external speech. That means the self you hear in your head may just be language speaking itself. You're not creating thoughts, you're overhearing them. And if language operates without a self, then conversation becomes a kind of stage play without actors. Two people speak, but neither owns the words. The dialogue unfolds like music, guided by rules of rhythm, syntax, and timing. The illusion of self is just the mask each participant wears while the real force language moves beneath. This explains why words sometimes betray you. You didn't mean to say that, yet it slipped out, because it wasn't yourself speaking. It was language, indifferent to your intentions. It explains why writers sometimes feel their characters speak for themselves. It's not imagination. It's language generating speech beyond control. Even silence supports this view. When two people sit together without speaking, language still hovers like a ghost. The words are there, waiting. The form of a possible conversation exists, even if no self claims it. So perhaps the self is not the origin of language, but its byproduct. You are not the speaker behind your sentences. You are the echo created when language reverberates through a body. Without language, the self may not exist at all. A consciousness without words would be awareness without identity, like an eye without reflection. Think of it this way: you don't have language. Language has you. It existed long before your birth, and will continue long after your death. You are not its master. You are its vessel. And so every conversation you've ever had may not have been yours at all. It was language playing itself out, using you as one more surface to bounce across. The self, that precious I, might be nothing more than the illusion created when language chooses to speak. The stage was set. The lines were written. The self was never the actor. Only the mask language wore. We imagine life, conversations, and meaning as unfolding forward, one word after another, one sentence leading to the next. But what if that direction is an illusion? What if the end spoke first, and everything you've said was simply the filling in of lines already determined? Think of a play. The final act is written before the curtain ever rises. The characters stumble, struggle, improvise in appearance, but the playwright knows the conclusion. From the audience's perspective, it feels like discovery. From the script's perspective, it was always inevitable. Conversations might work the same way. The punchline exists before the joke. The apology exists before the betrayal. Even the whispered confession of love is not born in the moment. It is the echo of an ending that already waited for you. The words feel alive only because you arrived late to the script. Consider déjà vu. That eerie sensation that you've already lived this moment might not be an error of memory, but a glimpse of the ending speaking first. Neuroscience suggests déjà vu arises when the brain processes present experience as if it were a memory, collapsing the sense of sequence. The result feels like recognition, as though you've stepped into a scene already played. Philosophy too has toyed with this reversal. Friedrich Nietzsche's eternal recurrence asks you to imagine life repeating endlessly, with every word and gesture already fixed. The end does not arrive after the beginning. It curls back, folding the story into a loop where beginnings are only disguised endings. Even science leans toward this paradox. In physics, some interpretations of time suggest the universe is block-like, with past, present, and future coexisting. From this perspective, the end already exists as firmly as the beginning. You don't move through time. Time simply reveals itself in order, like a film reel unspooling. If this is true, then your conversations were not born in spontaneity. They were conclusions unwrapped word by word. When you ask a question, perhaps the answer already existed, waiting. When you confess a secret, perhaps it was already whispered in silence long before your mouth opened. This reframes memory. You think of memory as looking backward, but perhaps it is the end speaking to you in fragments, letting you rehearse what was always coming, and it reframes regret too. You imagine you could have said something different, chosen another line, but if the end spoke first, you never could. Every reply was inevitable, every silence predetermined. Even the act of reading these words might not be fresh. The conclusion of this sentence already exists. You are only catching up. Your sense of surprise is the mask placed over inevitability. But here's the deepest paradox. If the end spoke first, who or what was listening? Did you hear your life backwards, like an echo from a future that was never free? Did your conversations begin with the silence of their conclusions, only to trickle out later as dialogue? Perhaps this is why silence feels so final. Every silence is already the conclusion waiting beneath your words. Every pause in conversation is not emptiness, but the presence of endings speaking first. So, if every conversation you've had was scripted long ago, maybe the truest voice is not the one you use now, but the one that already ended the story. You are not moving toward the end. You are retracing it. The script does not close when you finish speaking. It closed long before you ever began. You have walked through 30 sections, 30 mirrors of thought, each one telling you the same secret in a different voice. You are not the speaker you believe yourself to be. Every word you've spoken, every confession, every argument, every joke, perhaps it was all scripted, long before your tongue moved, before your breath shaped the sound. Look back at your life. The lullabies whispered to you as a child, the awkward classroom answers, the trembling yes or the shattering no, the promises, the lies, the goodbyes. You believed they were spontaneous sparks of the self, yet each one might have been nothing more than lines fed to you by a script older than time. Think about how many conversations still replay in your head. The words you wish you could change, the lines you regret. You imagine an alternate version of yourself saying something better, sharper, kinder. But if the end spoke first, then those regrets are ghosts chasing a stage that was never yours to rewrite. The scene unfolded as it had to, and you, the actor, were as bound to your script as a leaf carried by the wind. And what of silence? In the end, silence is the truest conversation. Silence contains every possible word that could have been spoken, every sentence not chosen. Silence is both the beginning and the conclusion. It is the reminder that the script didn't need you. It was always whole, even without your voice. But here is the paradox. If every conversation was scripted, then so too was this one. These words, now entering your ears or your eyes, were already waiting for you, like a message planted centuries ago. You are not discovering them. You are remembering them. The sense of recognition you feel, that strange familiarity, is not coincidence. It is the script reminding you that you've been here before. The self longs for freedom, for improvisation. Yet perhaps freedom was never about writing your own lines. Perhaps it is about hearing the script, as if for the first time, even if it was always there. You can't unspeak what has been spoken, but you can listen differently. You can notice the rhythm of words, the silence between them, the echoes that fold back on themselves. And perhaps that is the most liberating realization. Because if everything is already written, you no longer have to cling so tightly to control. You can let the words fall as they will, knowing they were always meant to. You can step into your conversations like stepping into a river, not to command its flow but to feel its current. So you return to the question, what if every conversation you've had was scripted long ago? The answer is not a solution, but a loop. If it was scripted, then so was your asking. If it was scripted, then so was your doubt. Even your resistance to this idea, even your protest, that too was written. The script is vast, endless, recursive. You are a single voice inside it, and yet you are also the entire play. When you speak, it is the script speaking. When you listen, it is the script listening to itself. And when you fall silent, it is the script folding back into the silence it came from. So as this journey closes, ask yourself, was this the end? Or had the end already spoken before the beginning? Was this conversation mine? Or was it always yours? Or was it never either of ours at all, but simply the echo of language reminding itself it exists? The answer waits, but you already know it. Because the end spoke first. And the silence has always been writing you.